Anyway, we both ended up getting a little drunk, and she offered for me to go back to her place. Frankly, I was too far gone at that point, and wouldn't have been able to do anything even if I wanted to. So, to her surprise, I actually declined. She seemed aggravated by the fact I said no. I guess she just thought all guys said yes to an invitation like that. In hindsight, she got a bit too angry about the whole thing, but she cooled off pretty quickly, and I selectively forgot about it. The glory of alcohol. In all honesty, I was surprised that this fetish website had led to me sort of dating a girl. I figured it would all be about hookups and one-night flings, but Zoe and I actually organised a third date. I sent her a message about getting dinner, but she messaged me saying we should skip it and get straight to the drinks. Alright, fine by me. The night started well enough. I arrived late, but Zoe looked particularly happy to see me. You smooth dog, I thought to myself. She was wearing a pair of tight leather pants. Very nice, if I do say so myself. I planned on pacing my alcohol consumption better that night, expecting another invitation from Zoe to head back to her place. I didn't plan on whiskey dicking 2 times in a row. I order a beer and drink it slowly. Around 10 minutes in, I spot those same 4 guys from last time over in the corner. I'm sure it was them. This was a completely different bar in a different part of town. Could have just been a coincidence, but I didn't like the way they kept throwing the occasional glance our way, just like the time before. Sometimes you just know something isn't right, and this was one of those times. I mentioned it again to Zoe, and we shared a laugh that those guys must be stalking us or something. We chat and flirt for around an hour, when I start to feel a little lightheaded. That's strange. At this point, I've barely drunk anything. This woozy feeling intensifies little by little, and I start to realize something's wrong. I excuse myself, and by the time I make it to the bathroom, the stalls are spinning. I fumble my way inside one of them, and force myself to vomit in that would help me without question. My pal, Jeff. Slurring my words, I tell him the bar name and say I need an evac pronto. I count my lucky stars that I made that call when I did, because a few minutes later, I was so far gone I don't remember a thing. Jeff relayed to me what happened next. When Jeff arrived, I was being carried out of the bar by Zoe and some random guy. Neither appeared concerned. They were more like determined, on a mission. According to Jeff, they led me over to a van where a few other guys were waiting and were preparing to put me in the back of it. When he described the guys to me as best he could, I knew who he was talking about. Those same rough-looking guys who had been staring at Zoe and I the entire evening and the time before. These hadn't been a set of dates, they'd been a set of traps. Zoe and the Glancers were in cahoots. That explains her anger on the second meetup. She must have told those guys where she was going to take me, and was planning on leading me into an ambush. This time, she wasn't taking any risks, and wanted to make sure I went along with them. She must have spiked my drink when I went to the bathroom or something. The bitch. Jeff gets out of the vehicle and rushes over, telling them he knows exactly what's going on and that he's going to call the police. He took their license plate number and pictures of the whole group with his phone. A couple of the guys start to get aggressive towards him, and Zoe's there screaming at him to fuck off, but Jeff manages to keep his cool. When a couple of late-night passers-by come along, the group lost their nerve and dumped me in the middle of the road, leaving it to Jeff to scoop me up and get me to a hospital. They took off in the other direction. I woke up in the morning with the worst headache of my life, but other than that, I was going to be fine. I gave the cops as much information as I could about Zoe, but they couldn't find a trace of her on the site, and nothing ever came of it. Knowing Jeff, I'm sure he made it sound more heroic than it really was, but I have to be honest, he really saved my ass that night. I mean, what would have happened to me if he arrived just 1 or 2 minutes later? Jeff thinks human trafficking, but I'm not so sure that happens to guys all too often. I guess it's a possibility. Another friend of mine thinks they wanted to make a snuff movie. In theory, it could have been any number of things, especially when you consider they found me through a fetish website. Personally, I don't like to think too much about it. Guys, I think I fucked up. I could use some advice. It all started when I broke up with my ex 1 year ago. Her name was Haruka. Haruka was really kind, which was why I started dating her in the first place. But she was also really pessimistic, and as such, it was no fun to hang around with her. She was the kind of low spirit that made everyone around her depressed too, including me. You know the type of person I'm talking about. I think she had a borderline personality disorder. I only really noticed her weird traits when we started dating. Every time I'd finish talking on the phone, she'd keep asking me whom I'd been talking to. If ever I didn't respond straight away, she'd ask me over and over again, and wouldn't stop querying me until I answered. Most times I said it was my parents, and it really was. I could see it in her eyes that she didn't really believe me though. During the weekends, it was a given that I would have to spend my time with her. I'm talking every minute of it. When I was away from town due to work, she'd call me up every hour on the hour. She'd also request evidence that I'd actually been at work. Essentially, Haruka was a control freak. She made sure I had no privacy whatsoever. I think she would have controlled the way I shit and piss if she had the chance. She also started saying really disturbing things to me. Things like, "If you ever leave me for another girl, you know that I'd kill you, right?" I realized that this wasn't normal, but I was still in love with her at the time. At one point though, I decided enough was enough. I went to see her parents without telling her to try and sort out her problem, but before I could even discuss it with them, they started saying things like, "Our daughter's been really depressed over the past few years. She's been in such a bad place ever since she was dumped by her last boyfriend. I'm glad she managed to find a good young man like you. She's in a much better place now. I hadn't even seen her laughing until these past few months. Thank you so much." Her mother was seriously in tears before I could bring it up. It was surreal. I ended up saying everything was fine, and left with a newfound enthusiasm to make it work with her. But it didn't last. Her need for control got worse as the days passed by. Towards the end, any conversation with other girls became completely forbidden. When I mentioned I was arranging a work get-together with some female colleagues, she deleted their phone numbers off my phone. Even casual greetings with neighbors was disallowed if they were a female. At restaurants, if the person bringing out the menus was a waitress, Haruka would be the one to order. She wouldn't even let me look in the girl's direction. I couldn't do this anymore. It didn't matter if she had come from a bad place or not. This just wasn't how human beings were meant to live. I think I would have gone mad if I stayed with her any longer. I went to Haruka's apartment early one weekend. Maybe you'll think I'm a freak when I say this, but I actually scripted out how I was going to break the news to her. I made sure the breakup would be as kind as possible. I sighed a breath of relief when I finished talking. I looked up to see her staring at the floor. I couldn't see the expression on her face at all. Not wanting to make her cry, I turned to leave with an, I'm really sorry." But as I got up, she suddenly reared her head upwards and with a massive shriek shouted, "How dare you?" Her face had contorted into a devilish sneer. It wasn't sadness in her eyes at all. It was fury. She looked at me as though she was looking at a cockroach, her contempt for me as clear as day. Before I had a chance to even open my mouth, she grabbed hold of my shirt and threw me to the ground with an almost otherworldly strength. She then ran off into the kitchen, shrieking all the way. Terrified and lost for words, I bolted out of the door, leaving my shoes behind, all the while hearing her shout things like, "You don't deserve to live, you disgusting degenerate. I'm going to cut your fucking throat." And the ever-reliable, "If I can't have you, no one can." I realized that the situation was dire. She had entered the kitchen to fetch herself a weapon. She most likely just wanted to threaten me, but of course I couldn't be sure. Biting my lips in the hallway, I waited for the elevator doors to open. But as they were about to, with a soft groan, I saw Haruka burst out from her room just 10 meters away. Her door opened with such speed and force, it was almost as if she had broken right through the damn thing without opening it. The intensity in her eyes. She was like a woman possessed. As soon as I saw that, I knew that she didn't simply want to threaten me with the knife in her hand. She really did want to slit my throat. Crying out in shock, I left the elevator and stumbled for the stairs to my left. Her apartment was on the 5th floor, but I had no choice. She would have killed me if I waited there for the elevator to open. I know that much. When the window was up, he threw his suitcase out, then dove through himself, not caring what was below him, only worried about what was behind. He landed without
Number 6.
So my mum left the picture when I was 3. She literally picked up one day and just walked out. So for a long time, it was just my dad and I. I'm a male, and at the time my dad met Tammy, I was 13. I was chubby, and at the time, small for my age. I still had my baby fat. I was, and still am a nerd. So was my dad, and we shared a love of Star Wars, comic books, and science fiction. My dad decided that he needed to meet someone. He was lonely, and I thought it would be nice to have a mother figure. This was before online dating, and there was still personals in the paper. My dad filled out an ad, and it wasn't long before he met Tammy. I remember him telling me about her, and how happy he looked. They dated for a month before my dad figured it was getting serious, and he wanted to introduce me to her. So my dad decided to take us out for dinner, then a movie. I remember my grandma helping me to get dressed, and I was super nervous to meet her. She seemed nice at first, but even at that age, I could sense that something was off. We went to Sizzler's for dinner, and my dad told me to order whatever I liked. He then excused himself to the bathroom. I smiled at Tammy, went to say something, and she cuts me off, telling me that my dad's been letting me eat whatever I wanted, and that I'm a fat little piggy. She demonstrated this by actually fucking making pig noises. I was crushed. I mean, honestly, I wasn't very heavy. Maybe a little chubby, but not obese like some children are today. And my dad actually didn't let me eat whatever I wanted. But anyways, back to the story. She ignored me until my dad came back, and then played nice. I, for my dad's sake, faked being nice to her. I wanted to tell my dad what she said, but I didn't want to disappoint him or upset him. My dad was, and is my best friend. Anyway, so I hoped and prayed my dad would realize what a bitch she was and come to his senses. But sadly, he didn't. They dated steadily, and when I was 15, Tammy moved in. Now, that summer, I finally lost my baby fat and grew like a good foot or two. My dad's 6'3", so it wasn't surprising that I shot up to almost 6 feet by age 15. Puberty kicked in too, and my voice was doing that weird cracking thing. I made it a point to avoid Tammy. I went to school, came home, and stayed in my room and did my homework and waited for my dad to get home. However, she started in on me most days as soon as I walked in. She'd always find something. I was a loser, I was stupid, etc. Just cruel, mean things. The few times I told my dad, he just insisted that we all needed to adjust. So I just decided that I could put up with her for 3 more years for my dad's sake, then I was out of there. The next 3 years really sucked. Her insults got meaner. She would also do things like put glass, pieces of paper and sand in my food, and just my plate. I started refusing to eat her food. I was terrified that she would poison me or something. And it was around this time that my dad and her got married. Graduation came, and I was so relieved because I was set to enlist in the army. I planned on being in basic by July, but of course, she had to try and ruin that. My recruiter got a call from someone saying that I smoked pot and did drugs. Thankfully, I passed my drug test, but I know that it was her. One night before I left for boot camp, my dad had a huge party for me. She had tried to cancel it earlier, claiming she was sick, but by that point, my dad had already invited most of my family and friends. She pouted the entire time. I started to see that my dad was kind of starting to see past her facade. Let's skip a few more years, and I get leave. I've been deployed twice now, and I hadn't seen my dad in 22 months, so I was dying to see him. He told me in previous conversations that their marriage was pretty much over. She not only was controlling and verbally abusive, but a few weeks prior, she had knocked my dad out with a cast iron skillet. He had given her an ultimatum of a month to get out, or he was throwing her crap out. The night I got in was late. My dad picked me up and we came home. She was gone supposedly. She started moving her crap into her sister's and was pretty much staying most nights there. So Dad and I eat, and we get to bed. Around 1, I feel my bed move. I'm exhausted, and figure it's my dad's dog Caesar, a German Shepherd. But that's when I feel hands go around my neck, and my soldier instincts kick in. I flip the intruder over and subdue them. My dad runs in and flips the light on. He's got his gun out. And, surprise, surprise, it's my stepmonster. Dad calls the police, files a restraining order, and serves her with divorce papers. A lot more shit happens, such as her destroying my dad's new Mercedes, but I won't bore you with the details. What matters is that they're divorced, and I never have to see that bitch again.
Number 5.
On a rainy night, in the era before cell phones, I was 18, walking a very long way home from work, and I foolishly accepted a ride home from a strange man. I was a small town girl, living in her lonely world, and I had just gotten off of a double shift. He was elderly, acted genuinely concerned for me, and I saw a Bible in the backseat. Probably safe, right? The car was old and broken down, and he had to get out to open the door for me. It took him a while as he had trouble walking with a bum leg. He told me the passenger door didn't open from the inside. I immediately felt weird, but years of nice girl training told me that he's gone to so much trouble, don't say no. We chatted for a while and he politely complimented my uniform, my hair, and told me that I looked like his late wife, and that her spirit must have led him to help get me home. It sounded very sweet the way he told it. The conversation turned to if I was still in school, what my hobbies were like, and gradually turned to whether or not I was on my period, which was rude, but he acted like it was going to be the punchline of a joke, so I laughingly asked him why he would want to know. He said, very calmly, "Because if you're fertile, we should start trying for a family right away." Oh shit. He said that God had kept him lonely for years, but now, because I looked so much like his late wife, it was clear that I was meant to be his, so he could start a life over again, and finally have lots of children like his wife was unable to do. He grabbed my hand and kissed it, and said, "I can't wait to show you our new bed. I told him I forgot something at work. He told me I could get it tomorrow. I told him I needed to pee, and he said that I could hold it until we got home. He wasn't going to let me out. He kept talking about how things were different back then, and how men are the head of the households, that women are to follow their fathers and their new husbands, and God says this, and God says that. He talked about his wedding day, how his wife's father had given her to him, so I blurted out, "You're going to get my father's permission to marry me before taking me to your home, right? God would want that, right? You need to do that because otherwise we'd be living in sin, and the marriage bed isn't holy anymore," which I remembered from many, many days of church sermons. He got offended then and said that he knew the Bible better than I did, and of course he knew to ask my father for permission. I told him that we couldn't live together in sin, we should go to my house before going home, and I reminded him that the street wasn't far. Still trying to keep the conversation light and joking, I told him that's what a godly man would do, and he wholeheartedly agreed. Then we got to the street where I had previously told him I lived. He asked which house was my parents'. I gave him a fake house number far away from mine and had him drop me there. He wanted to come inside. I told him I needed to let my parents know about God sending me a husband before he could meet them. I said it would take a few days, come back tomorrow. He said, "I'll give you a few minutes, but then we need to be on our way." I told him to drive around the block so I could have some time to pack my clothes. He nodded and finally opened the car door. I ran to that house's door, waved to him till he drove away, then sprinted to my house, where I lived alone. I double-bolted the door and put the couch in front of it that night. I never saw him again. I didn't call the police, though I wish I had. I moved in with my boyfriend a few days later, and I insisted on waiting at work until he could pick me up every night.
Number 4.
This just happened to me a few nights ago, and I'm still a bit shaken up, so bear with me. I'm a female bartender at a small cafe that doubles as a venue. During the day, we serve coffee and lunch, and at night, we have a full bar with bands, comedy shows, etc. On this night, there was an open mic comedy show. Not a lot of comedians showed up, so we ended up closing up shop early and I was ready to go home. I had a patron come in and order a single beer during the comedy show. He was acting nervous, but being a female bartender, I get male customers that are shy or don't want to talk to women, so I didn't think much about it. He sat down, sipped his beer and watched the show. Since we closed early, everyone was pretty much gone and I wanted to lock up and clean so I could get home. After I escorted the last couple out of the bar and got ready to lock the door, I see the man from earlier walk down the back hallway and into the men's restroom. Not even a minute later, he burst through the door yelling,
"Hurry, come back here, I need help."
I stood at the opposite end of the hallway and asked him what was wrong.
"The toilet's overflowing. There's water all over the floor. Please, help me clean this up."
I could tell that something was wrong with that answer, and I replied, "It's okay, man, it happens. I'll mop it up. I'm just trying to close up right now." He continued to argue with me, trying to get me to come into the bathroom with him as I stood about 20 feet away down the hallway. Finally, he walks towards me very aggressively and tries to grab my arm.
"You need to come back here now,"
he says. I immediately put my hands out in front of me so he cannot come any closer, and I tell him that he has to leave. He walks outside and I lock the door behind him. I check the bathroom and it's completely spotless. No water on the floor at all. I flush the toilet and the urinal and they're both working fine. I start to get nervous and I take my large pocket knife and clip it to the waistband of my pants, just in case. As I'm cleaning our espresso machine and putting toppers on the liquor bottles, I hear a tapping noise. I look up at the front of the store, which is one big window that has a few curtains covering it. The same man is tapping on the window, waving at me and laughing like a maniac. I watch him walk over to the door and pull on it. It doesn't open since I had locked it after he left. He starts screaming and pounding on the glass saying, "Open the fucking door, I'm going to fucking kill you." Fight overcame flight at this point and I walked around the counter and about 6 feet from the door. I pulled out my knife and locked eyes with him and yelled,
I'm calling the cops. Get the fuck out of here.
He smiled and walked out of view of the window. At this point, all of my adrenaline just crashed. I locked myself in the office and called 911, crying, explaining that I'm alone and a man tried to lure me into the bathroom and was outside trying to get into my bar. I waited an hour and a half and no police ever showed up. I called my boyfriend and he drove up to the shop. My manager watched the security cameras from home, making sure that the man didn't come back. I did the deposit and immediately drove home, my boyfriend following closely behind me. My male busboy has been coming into work with me, so I'm not alone, and the managers have been keeping an eye on the security cameras while I'm working.
Number 3.
My encounter took place earlier this week in a beach town in Central Florida. I surf. It's a big part of my life, and if I go a few days without getting in the water, I go through withdrawals. In the last year, my work schedule has changed so that I'm working a lot of late evenings, usually getting home around 4 AM. I live on the beach and have gotten myself into a routine of coming home, grabbing a bowl of cereal, then getting my board and heading to the beach around 4:30 AM. It's still dark at this time, but most nights the moonlight and the glow from the pier is enough to illuminate the waves. I'll usually surf for a couple of hours, catch the sunrise, and then head home to sleep. Most days the beach is empty for the first hour or so, with the exception of the occasional jogger. Monday starts off with the usual routine. I usually stay pretty close to the pier, but the rip current was strong, and on days like that, I just drift with the current until I hit a point about a half mile down from the pier, then paddle back into shore and back to the starting point. As I was waiting for the next set, I noticed the outline of someone standing on the shore, watching me. I couldn't really make out any details, just that there was indeed a person there. I really didn't think twice about it, as it's not uncommon for people to stop and watch for a few minutes. I continued surfing and put him out of mind. Approximately 45 minutes later, the current has pulled me to my marker and I start to paddle into shore. It's then that I notice what I think is the same person from earlier, still lingering, which is odd because I've been out there for a while and drifted a fair distance. He apparently followed along the whole time, on the shore. I reach the shore, throw a quick glance in his direction. He's a husky white male, about 40-ish, wearing some shorts and a ratty-looking red 49ers shirt from what I can see. He's about 15 feet behind, in the shadows, and I started walking briskly back up the beach towards the pier and my beach access ramp. He follows along, always keeping the same distance, even though I speed up and slow down a few times just to see how he reacts. Nothing is said, but it's clear he's following me at this point. I get to the beach access ramp, turn around, and he's gone. He must have ducked behind one of the hotel stairwells is all I can think, but I wasn't going to go look for him, and just chalked it up to one of the local homeless or eccentrics the area attracts and didn't really give it any more thought. End of story, right? Well, not exactly. Fast forward to the next morning. It's overcast and a little darker out. I'm in my routine and am back on the beach at about 4:45 AM. The swells are light and I'm close to the pier just floating as there is no rip current this day. I start to get that you are being watched feeling and can't seem to shake it. Looking around, the beach and pier are deserted, except I notice what looks like a lone fisherman standing above me on the pier, but can't really make out any of his details as he is backlit and I can only see his outline. I don't notice a pole and he seems to be just standing there. I get into a wave and as I glance back, it looks like the guy threw something into the water at that moment. I didn't think anything of it until a few minutes later when I glance back and it appears he just tossed something else into the water. As soon as I look in his direction, he stops what he's doing and just stands there, motionless. So now I'm curious what he's up to. The sky is lighting up a bit and the next set of waves rolls through. This time, as I start to paddle into the wave, I'm watching him over my shoulder. As soon as it looks like my attention is elsewhere, the man tosses in several more objects, yet stops as soon as I'm turned back towards him. It finally dawns on me what he's doing. He's chumming the water by tossing chunks of meat into the sea around me. You chum to attract fish, and the bigger pieces you use, the bigger fish you attract. And these were not small. This guy has no fishing gear with him and is attempting to attract sharks right to where I am, in the dark water, maybe 150 yards offshore. I am instantly a mix of fear and anger. I start paddling hard but steadily into shore, and he then drops all pretense and dumps an entire bucket over the side of the pier, while starting to walk back towards the shore end. As I get out of the water, I start to move towards the pier stairwell, intent on confronting him. I'm no punk, and this guy just put me into a dangerous situation. He is coming down the pier in my direction as well, and this is when I finally get a decent look at the guy. He appears a little heavyset, and he's wearing a red shirt, a red 49ers shirt, the same guy from the day before. At this moment, a strong feeling comes over me that I need to get out of there instead of escalating the situation further. I'm not the toughest guy on the block, but I've had my share of scraps and generally don't shy away from confrontation. But something inside of me felt really wrong. I change directions and begin walking towards the beach access ramp and home. He comes down the stairs and continues to follow me at about a 10-foot distance. The only sounds are the waves crashing on the shore as we play out our low-speed pursuit across the sand. I get to the beach ramp and start to go up. Now, this ramp has a 90-degree turn about halfway that leads to a 30 or so yard long walkway between two condo buildings to access the beach street. Once I hit the 90-degree turn and am out of his immediate line of sight, I book it and double time to the far end of the walkway, putting some distance between us. I'm still going back and forth in my head if I should confront him or follow my gut and walk away. I stop and wait at the far end of the walkway as he turns the corner at the 90-degree bend and just stops. We just stare at each other in silence. After what felt like ages but was probably all of 20 seconds, he reaches into his waistband and draws out what I take to be a fillet knife. I can see its reflection in the light. He waves to me with his other hand, lets out a short, sharp laugh, and quickly spins on his heels, disappearing back down the ramp and out of sight. I decided that I had had enough, and taking a slightly roundabout route to make sure he wasn't tailing me still, I headed home. I haven't seen him since, but I also haven't been back to the beach in a few days.
Number 2.
I'm now 53 years old, but back in '97, I was just getting over a nasty divorce and decided to move back to North Carolina from California. I spoke with my sister who still lived in our hometown, and she suggested that I talk with her husband Steve about his rental house. I remember that at the time he was very enthusiastic about my renting his house and gave me an absurdly low monthly rate for the place. He explained that the house was originally built in 1910, which immediately gave me pause as the place was likely an old dump. He must have sensed my hesitation because he quickly began listing all the renovations that he made to the place in the past few years, and assured me that anything that I found not to my liking he could quickly fix. He explained that he was having a bit of trouble keeping it rented because, while the house itself was nice, the neighborhood was a bit seedy, and former tenants had complained about people somehow entering the house while they were gone to work. He told me that he had now installed all new locks as well as an alarm system, so intrusions were a thing of the past. Also, there was a small unattached guest house on the property, freshly renovated, that was now occupied by a friend of his named Jake, who would keep an eye on my place as well. Additionally, he would waive the first month's rent since I was family. It sounded like a pretty good deal, and I thanked him and accepted. With cash being tight and still needing to land a job once I arrived, I was grateful for his help. 2 weeks later, I packed up my van and hit the road cross country. A few uneventful days later, I pulled up to my sister's house and had a nice homecoming. It was December, and being spoiled by West Coast weather, I had forgotten about the winter time, so my first priority was getting a good winter coat, as well as some basic household items that I could not bring in the van. Fortunately, my sister donated a bed as well as a dining table, so a round of shopping got the rest of the things I needed. After shopping with my sister, it was late in the afternoon when we set out in my van to offload it into my new home. The street the house was on was an oddity to me. When we first turned onto the street close to my sister's address, the area was bright and clean, but the closer we got to my new home, the more gloomy it became. Even before pulling up to the house, you could tell from a distance that it was quite a large 2-story affair. My sister commented that it had 4 bedrooms, 2 on each floor, with one of the downstairs rooms having a window overlooking the front porch, and a matching bedroom on the 2nd floor, also overlooking the street. The house itself was shaped like a rectangle, with the southern short end facing the street. It was a bit of a climb to the front door of the house, as it was connected to the sidewalk by 2 steep flights of wide stone steps, similar to a vintage New York City brownstone home. We climbed the steps and my sister pointed out the new bright yellow exterior paint job. I nodded, but my attention was on the dim outline of the front door, which was bathed in the shadow of the porch's full-length overhang. In the center of the door were 6 large panes of clear glass. I glanced at my sister. Won't it be pretty easy for someone to break in through all this glass? She smiled. No one has ever broken in this door. It's tougher than it looks. She handed me the keys and I unlocked the door. The light switches are just inside the door. She flipped on the interior light and from the front door, I could now see a long hallway with a door to my immediate left that opened into the downstairs front bedroom, and at the end of the hallway, a door to the left and to the right, the entrance to the staircase heading upstairs. She marched over to the alarm box and typed in a code. There's motion detectors downstairs, here in the hall, in each room and at the top of the staircase. You can activate them at night if you want, as long as you're staying upstairs. Otherwise you only have 30 seconds to disarm them before the call goes out to the security monitoring service. On your keyring, you have the keys to the rental door locks on the 2 downstairs bedrooms. They've been cleaned, and just keep them locked. We'd like to rent them out at some point. I grimaced. What's with the blue door? Every inch of the hallway's hardwood floor had been neatly painted blue. Oh, Steve felt that refinishing them was going to be a big bother. So he just had each floor painted teal and then just sealed them. Great. I ran my hand over the vintage doorframe to the bedroom and thought it a shame that its scrollwork and medallions were all glopped over liberally with fresh white paint. We moved down the hallway and went through the doorway. This is the formal dining room. I'll get that table of mine and set it up in here for you. The room itself looked big enough to feed an army. She led me through a doorway centered in the right wall of the dining room. And here's the kitchen. The kitchen was also huge, obviously meant to accommodate a very large family back in the day. Looks like I can cook the next Thanksgiving meal. She nodded and pointed at the open door opposite the kitchen entrance. That door leads to the downstairs suite, which has the 2nd bedroom, the laundry room, and the downstairs bathroom. Walking over to the open door, she pointed at the brick propping the door open. Please leave this brick alone, as this door needs to be kept open so that the warm air in the house can keep the pipes in the bathroom from freezing up. No problem, and I'll see if I can find you a cheap deal on a washer and dryer. Thanks, sis. I'd appreciate that. We then headed upstairs where there were 2 more bedrooms, with the larger of the 2 having an attached bathroom. I thought this room would be the one for you. It did look like a nice setup for me. Yeah, I think this'll do just fine. I could tell she was pleased. Okay, let's head back to my house and we can finish getting you moved in tomorrow. We can transfer the utilities over in the morning. Settling in for the ride back to my sister's house, I already knew that something was wrong with my new home. Over the years, I've read a few accounts of haunted houses, and most had a familiar theme. A happy family moves into a home and slowly becomes aware that the house has spirits and a dark side to it. They typically did not believe in ghosts when they moved in, and only came to believe as strange incidences began to pile up. My story here is just the opposite. From the moment we pulled up to the house, I could feel something watching the car from the upstairs window. I could also feel whatever it was moving around the house with us, but careful not to show itself. In retrospect, I recall always being able to generally sense where in the house it was, but especially if it was in the same room or looking at me. I don't claim any gift, and have not had any such experiences since that time. The atmosphere of the house inside was, I can only describe as both intensely silent and heavy. This was not a happy home. In truth, my state of mind at the time, overwhelmed with the separation from my kids and the divorce, was so bleak that the house's mood suited me just fine. I wasn't looking for happiness, and this house offered none. My only concern, as I recall, was hoping that the spirit lurking there would not get too irritating. But I can tell you for certain that at the time, I I was absolutely unafraid. A ghost in the house was just one of many things to be cautious with in that neighbourhood. Carjackings, armed robbery and burglary, those all concerned me more than some spook. My late uncle had explained long ago that spirits could play some little games with you if you let them know that you felt afraid. I have had 2 prior encounters with spirits before moving into this house, but those will be saved for another time. In general, I characterize myself as a practical man with little interest in the supernatural, despite the fact that I know it exists. Once I got my few bits of borrowed furniture and my stuff sorted out in the house, my life fell into a normal routine. I found a job at a local printing company about a mile from the house and was glad to cram in as much overtime as I could. After a while, I had gotten caught up on my bills and my pace at the work slowed down. I then began to spend more time at home. The spirit had kept its distance during that time, and I had hoped it would stay that way, but the quiet would not last. One night, I was dozing in my bed upstairs when I heard walking sounds downstairs. Someone with a heavy tread was moving down the entry hall. I listened. I then heard the sounds of someone slowly coming up the staircase. I grabbed my baseball bat and ran to the top of the stairs, flicking the lights on. The stairs were empty, but I could sense this thing about halfway down the staircase. I stared at its location. I was scared furious. Look, I don't care who you are. Just stop this stomping around and quit trying to screw with me. We both live here, and I could care less about your sad story, so just leave me alone. With that, I went back to my bedroom and slammed the door. It was quiet the rest of the night, and I remember when the sun came up, having a smug sense of victory. I would only later realize how wrong I was. Now that the cat was out of the bag and it knew that I could sense its location, it began playing some games to get to me indirectly. I'll share those that I recall. It became almost a daily occurrence to come home only to find the brick that held open the door to the downstairs suite moved to the center of the kitchen and the door to the suite closed. It caused me to constantly worry about the pipes during the winter time, and anything else I propped the door open with simply joined the brick in the middle of the kitchen. This never occurred when I was home for the day, only when I was away at work. About twice a week, I would get a call from my brother-in-law informing me that the downstairs motion detector had gone off again, and the security company had called him to get an all clear. He asked me if anyone else had a key or was visiting, and the answer was always no. Eventually the problem got so bad that he first had the system inspected by the alarm company, who found nothing wrong, and finally he had the system turned off just to stop the phone calls. Normally I sleep pretty lightly. One Saturday morning, the sound of my bedroom door opening caused me to lift my head up and open my eyes. It had just gotten light outside, but I was startled to see the old lady from the house next door standing there, watching me. Now, this lady had a drinking problem and seemed to be a permanent fixture on her front porch where, brown bag bottled in hand, she glumly stared at the street traffic, never speaking. But today, she did. "What the hell are you doing here?" I said as I shot up from bed. "Well, I knocked on the door to ask if I could borrow $5, and the man said to go upstairs and ask you." "Fuck, what man?" "I don't know, I ain't seen him before." "Can I borrow $5? "No, get out of my house." It took me a few minutes of pushing and shouting before I finally herded her out to the porch, my heart pounding like a jackhammer. The next day, having calmed down a bit, I walked over to her and offered her the $5 in return for first hearing all about this mysterious man. "Well, I ain't seen him before, like I told you." "Right, what did he look like?" "He looked about 70 to my eyes. He wore blue pants, a long-sleeved blue t-shirt, and his collar was buttoned up. He had white hair but was mostly bald. Like I said, I asked him if I could borrow $5 and he just smiled and said his tenant was upstairs and said that I should go ask him. He let me in and then shut the door. That's the last I seen him. Can I have my money now?" "Sure, take it. If you see him again, let me know." I wandered back up my steps, now confident that I'd been given a warning. Once I had some money built up, I decided to join 1997 and buy myself a new big screen TV and one of those fancy new DVD players. It took 2 delivery guys from the appliance store to lug my new 50-inch projection TV up to the 2nd floor. You remember those 200-pound monsters, right? They set it up in the empty 2nd bedroom upstairs, and with the addition of a used recliner, I now had an official entertainment room. About a week after the TV was installed, I got a call from Jake next door while working the evening shift. "Dude, you better come home now. Your TV is blasting the house. I came outside wondering where all the racket was coming from, and looked up and saw your TV on through the upstairs window. I was gonna knock and ask you to turn it down when I noticed your car was gone." "Holy shit, someone's broken in?" "Dude, I'm trying to tell you, the TV's still on. They're still in the house." "Just stay outside and keep an eye on the front. I'll be right there." It took me only 3 minutes to race home, and when I pulled up, Jake was watching the front door and waved me up next to him. "This is freaking weird, man. As soon as I heard you turn the corner, I saw the TV light cut off. Just go around and guard the back door. I'm going through the front. I'll let you in and we can check the house together." I opened the front door. The house was dead quiet. I toggled the hall light switch, but got nothing. Looks like the breaker was tripped, and that meant travelling the length of the 1st floor back to the laundry room to the fuse box. Fishing my cigarette lighter from my pocket, I lit it and headed in. The feeble glow seemed to just make me jumpier. I had to walk slowly as running would snuff out the flame. Great. I just knew that some nut was waiting to pounce on me from the darkness, and was now mentally kicking myself for not just calling the cops. But in those days, and in that neighbourhood, the cops would take like an hour to show up. Still, I could just see the headline now. "Moron armed with a Bic lighter confronts serial killer. Community alarmed by horrific murder." Thankfully, I reached the fuse box safely and was able to reset the breaker. Turning the lights on, I then let Jake in from the front door. "Did you see him?" "No, the breaker was tripped. He's likely still upstairs. Let's go." But there was nothing. Jake and I searched every inch of that house, with Jake getting more and more unsettled. I remember how he stared at me. "Dude, someone was here. I swear it." "Well, they're gone now. He must have slipped out the window or something." Jake didn't look convinced. Neither was I. You see, when my brother-in-law installed the alarm system, he also had security bolts installed in all of the house's inside window frames. You couldn't open any window without first removing its hex nut screw. I didn't think it likely that a druggy intruder would bring a toolbox with him. I had gotten home one evening, having had a very busy work week, and was glad that I had gotten paid earlier that day. I had hit the ATM on the way home, and I had $80 in cash so that I could visit the utility company in the morning and pay my bill. The next morning found me in line at the electric company, handing the clerk my bill. But when I opened my wallet to get my cash, there was nothing there. My money was gone. I was absolutely bewildered as I stepped out of line and drove back to the ATM. I even went inside the bank and was reassured that I actually had withdrawn $80 the previous day. I could only conclude that somehow the 4 $20 bills had dropped out of my wallet. I looked all about the house but never found them. 3 weeks passed and one day I was getting ready for a date and was getting some socks on from my sock drawer. I spotted a $20 bill lying perfectly straight on the bottom of the drawer. Next to it, I saw the edge of another bill. I began lifting rolled up socks out of the drawer, and finally I saw the bottom of the drawer completely. All 4 $20 bills were neatly lined up across the bottom of the drawer. I had just done my laundry the day before, and can assure you that there was no money in that sock drawer at that time. Although I was fuming over this prank, it was at least good to know that I had not somehow lost the money myself. From that moment on, I always slept with my car keys and wallet inside my pillowcase. Each one of the house's 4 bedrooms had its own fireplace that my brother-in-law had renovated over to gas logs. Since the house had no central heating, I had the habit of using the various fireplaces as space heaters as needed during the winter months. Individually, each one was more than capable of warming the house up like toast if left running full blast for a short time. I recall that one bitterly cold January evening, I was running the one in my bedroom at about medium strength, which had the bedroom toasty warm when I went to sleep that night. I woke up in the middle of the night feeling like I was about to freeze to death. I flicked on the bedside table lamp and looked at the fireplace, still cheerfully running at medium strength. Hissing at the cold, I could actually see my breath fogging as it hit the air. I lurched over to the fireplace and checked for a draft or anything that could explain the fireplace's heat being sucked out of the room. No drafts, nothing. I could feel the heat only when my fingers were a few inches from the flames, but that was it. As I stood there staring at it, suddenly an enormous wave of heat erupted from the flames, as though the heat had somehow been held from the room and was abruptly released. Within a few minutes, the room was warm again and back to normal. Troubled, I went back to bed and had no further problems that night. Some 3 years into my stay at that house, I met the woman that I would ultimately marry. My girlfriend visited the house a number of times, but infinitely preferred my coming over to her place, as she said my house made her feel a bit uneasy. I stayed silent on the subject and happily went to her house instead. Then came the time when we decided to move in together. We decided that a new apartment was in order, one that was centrally located for both of our jobs. The only catch was that the lease for our current apartment was coming up for renewal, and I couldn't get out of my lease until the end of the following month. The bottom line was that her household would have to go into storage for a few weeks and she would have to move in with me during that time. We could then move into the new apartment together. She was certainly not happy with spending any time at my house. She didn't see anything, but confided that she always had the feeling, when alone, that the house was staring at her. She typically arrived at home about an hour before me in the afternoon, so one day, about a week before we were due to move, I was surprised to come home, only to find her sitting in her car out at the curb. I knocked on her window and she hurriedly wiped her eyes and stepped out to hug me. I took her in my arms and swiveled my head about, looking for any dodgy types that may have caused her tears. After practically begging her to tell me what was wrong, she would only reply that she arrived at the house about 40 minutes prior to my arrival and had gone inside. She then decided to come back outside and wait in her car for me. My common sense had told me that something had happened inside the house, so I gently asked if something had occurred that made her feel in danger. She shook her head no, but quietly informed me that until we departed the house, she would never be alone in it again. She would sit at her office until I called her that I was near the house. To this day, she still refuses to tell me what happened to her in the house that afternoon, so I guess it will stay a mystery. Moving day came all too soon. At the end of the day, we were both exhausted. There was only one task left to do, and that was give my old house a good cleaning before dropping off the keys to my brother-in-law. My girlfriend suggested that I wait till the morning, but I said no. I was determined to tie up all loose ends that evening and be done with this house. I drove over and spent the next few hours cleaning up and mopping the floors. At the end of it, I was pleased with my work and figured that the house was certainly much cleaner than when I moved in. I had placed my box of cleaning supplies in the trunk of my car and walked back up the steps one last time to lock up. I'm not sure why, but something compelled me to step inside and say something. Hey, as you can see, I'm moved out now. I can't say it's been fun, but it's been a home, I guess. Well, goodbye. With that, I locked up and walked down to my car. Giving the house a final glance, I saw the outline of someone peering out of the second floor window down upon me. My first and last glimpse of my landlord. I drove away and have carefully avoided that neighborhood ever since. As we reached the entrance of the building, we noticed that the big black hole we had been seeing was in fact what looked like a generator room. It seemed that the generator room used to have a wooden gate to gain access, but this had been destroyed by vandals, revealing the darkness within. As we got closer, we realized that there were two ways to get in. Either A, through the front double doors into what looked like a main foyer, or B, through a crooked-looking wooden door at the other end of the generator room. We chose the main foyer as it was the most welcoming option, and going through the generator room would have involved some athleticism to avoid hitting body parts on the machinery. It was a big generator for the size of the building, but I guess it would have powered other parts of the area as well. I pictured in my mind how, when the place was active and inhabited, That generator would have been running and noisy with purpose, but now it was just unused and in darkness, still as ice. When entering the main foyer of our last building, we were instantly in awe by how spacious the room was, but also how creepy it looked. From our low-light point of view entering the room, there was a corridor to the left at the back of the room protected by 2 doors with circular, submarine-like windows. A corridor at the back to the right which didn't have doors. A staircase to the immediate left which had windows for banisters so you could cock your head and look up into the darkness upstairs. And on the immediate right of the room was a smaller room with what looked like rows upon rows of hooks. I assumed that this would have been where security would be, and the many keys needed to access all the different parts of the site. I was the first one to assert our presence on the place by walking to the other end of the room to peer into the windows of the corridor going off to the left. My attention was drawn to just how much more the place had degraded compared to the other buildings. What was left of the paint on the walls was peeling, and the carpet was mouldy to the extent that it had liquefied to gloop and squelched under my feet. There was also an extra special pungent smell of death in the air, which made me wonder how many pigeons called this home and died here. Peering through the circular windows, the corridor led into another big room, which had much of the same, apart from a metal blind that ran along most of the room from the right door frame at the entry to another door with a glass panel. This room had all the trademarks of a school canteen. I turned around to look where the others were, when I froze to look down the corridor opposite, the one at the back on the right. It looked like an endless black hole, even when A shone his torch down the corridor. I had a really bad feeling that I shouldn't go down this corridor, but it's not like I wanted to either. It terrified me. I averted my gaze and turned my attention to the others, who, it would appear, were following my lead, as they also seemed a bit overwhelmed by the density of the darkness in our new environment. As I had already part-surveyed the canteen room and seen no immediate dangers, I opened the double doors and pushed on ahead with the others not far behind me in a triangular defensive formation. All angles were covered in case anything crept up on us. My initial observations regarding the canteen proved correct as we entered the room. A sign above the entry to behind the metal blinds read "Kitchen staff only." Other than that, there was nothing else of interest in the room to mention, other than how big the window seemed from the inside, which showed the contrast between the darkness inside the building compared to outside, almost making it seem like outside was lit up. Almost, but not quite there. It was still a struggle to see anything without our torches. As I was observing the outside through the windows to see if anybody had been creeping up on us, I heard A let out a shocked gasp which caught the attention of B and I. When we went over to see what his torch had illuminated, we were both equally made uneasy. 3 straight lines, resembling the mocking of the Trinity, had been slashed through the metal blinds. In case you don't know what the mocking of the Trinity is, I suggest you watch some paranormal investigation programs. It's supposedly the mark of demons of Satan used to mock the Holy Trinity, most commonly found on a person when they've been antagonizing in a location haunted by a demon. He ran his fingers down the mark, but not before pulling his hand away and turning white. B explained that the metal around these marks was still quite hot. With nothing around to logically explain why the metal would still be hot, a feeling of dread in all 3 of us set in. The darkness intensified worse than I'd seen it all evening, and we were all instantly in a state of high alert, causing us to look slowly around us, taking in every detail and looking for the smallest of movements. We have been doing our exploration for a couple of hours now, so for the blinds to still be hot as they were would mean that the metal blinds were slashed while we were there. Whatever or whoever had slashed the blinds would most likely still be around. We never even knew anybody else would be here, but would they know that we were here? Could they be in the same building, or indeed watching us right now? I think the same thoughts were rushing through all of our minds at the same time. We were all just stood there, silent. I felt the need to make sure that nothing behind the metal blind was causing it to heat up. I hoped that there would be something to explain it. I slowly and cautiously stepped forward to the kitchen door and shone my light inside the direction of the slashes. I could see a lot of cooking apparatus was still in the room, but nothing was contacting the metal blind. I tried to confirm my suspicions by entering the room, but to my surprise, the door was locked. Nothing I saw provided a logical explanation to why the blind was so hot, so my feeling of dread didn't alleviate. I turned around in defeat to see both A and B glaring at me. I didn't warn them I was going to the door, so I guess they were wondering what I was doing. I motioned to them that we should make a move and head back in the direction of the foyer. No words were necessary. This was the longest that we had been silent in each other's company for a long while. Back in the main foyer, we stood there still in complete silence, just looking at each other, soaking up everything that we had just witnessed, when we all turned in sync towards the dark corridor opposite the canteen. I concluded to myself that I was not going down that corridor after what I had just saw, and judging by A and B's expressions, they weren't too keen either. Our silence was broken by A, who requested that I take a photo of him as a souvenir of his investigation tonight. I had to confirm to him if he wanted the photograph taken inside this building, as I did not particularly feel safe, but A explained that it would take less than a minute, so I ended up obliging. A took up a pose and position in front of the double doors we had just exited from the canteen, and I began making sure my camera was set up properly to take a picture in our current setting. B moved positions to nearby the stairs in readiness for our probable exploration of the upper level. With a click of the button and a flash, the picture was taken. Upon review, it appeared I had moved the camera too quickly, as the picture was all blurred, so I motioned A to repose so I could take another shot. I focused my breath and steadied my nerves for the short time I took the second shot. I gave a thumbs up to A and was about to review the photo when suddenly the dreadful tranquility of the moment was pierced by a loud boom, which came from an unknown location. It felt like this noise rippled the blood in my body. We were all looking around frantically when there was another loud thud, followed by another one, which I then realized was coming from upstairs, and sounded like very heavy footsteps right above. The loud thuds slowly continued as I turned my attention to B, who was stood near the stairs. I saw his pupils dilate in complete shock as he then turned to look up in the direction of upstairs, while at the same time, a final loud thud from the top of upstairs sent us all over the edge. Without a second thought, flight mode kicked in. I don't think I'd ever run so fast in my life. Physically, everything was happening so quickly, but mentally, time was at a standstill as I went over my predicament like my life was flashing before my eyes. I thought about the compound as it loomed over us as we drew ever closer to it. I thought about how I left in that moment, about how I should have listened to those feelings. I thought about the darkness, the L-shaped building, the creepy ladder, the pigeon scaring me, and A disappearing. I remembered the strange man at the gate, the police line, the blood. I relived my experience of being all alone, seeing things and hearing voices. After what felt like I had just lived through decades in my head, I snapped out of the trance and regained some composure as I found our exit point and bundled out the compound, followed by B and finally by A. We all stopped to look back at the compound, but there was no movement or no one to be found. Everything was still, everything was silent, even the sea. I still felt like we were being watched as we continued to eyeball the place that had instilled so much fear in us, so much paranoia, and in the end, so much dread. This is one place I will not be coming back to in a long time. My thoughts were suddenly popped by the sound of A drop down and crouching with his hands tucked into his legs. A looked the most worst for wear out of all of us. The fear had taken over him completely. I watched as A, this 6'6" machine of a man, break down right in front of me, wallowing in his newfound dread. I had never seen a man of his size cry like that before. A was inconsolable and kept shouting about all the negative, scary thoughts now occupying his head, and kept asking B and I to make them stop. I wasn't sure whether A was in shock or was in complete adrenaline mode, but I joined B in reassuring him everything was okay as we were now out of the compound. After about 15 minutes, we managed to calm A down to the point that he felt like he could walk again, and we began the journey back to our houses with the sun now starting to rise. The walk home was not as eventful as our night in the compound. I kept quiet as I was still rerunning things over in my head and wondering about all the loose ends from the night. I also thought about all the unanswered questions I had, such as what those thuds were, or where that sinister laughter came from, which I now concluded was not my imagination. The sun continued to rise as we progressed on our journeys home. I was now worried about A. I had never seen him this bad before. I never thought in that moment how much our exploration had broken him, but I'd soon find out as things would take a much more sinister turn away from the compound. In fact, I continue to this day to worry about A. I wish I could say that the story ends now that we've completed our urban exploration, but sadly, it doesn't. G'day mates, it's B-Buster here. So before the video begins, I just wanted to say a massive thank you to everyone who liked and commented on the previous video. It was totally unexpected by me to see so many people come out from the woodworks and support and creepy scary at the filming and week of video, and without further ado, let's begin.
Number 6.
Yesterday on Thanksgiving, I woke up from having slept late and wanted to go for a walk in the park before the sun went down. As I pulled into the parking lot, I noticed a van next to me. There was a woman outside the passenger door of the van. She whirled around at me and stared at me for about 6 seconds. Her face was completely cracked out. It had that sunken reptile look. Her eyes were absolutely dead. I could tell that she was completely out of it. In the driver's seat was a greasy-looking man. He was just staring at me. I got out of the car and wasn't too worried yet because this park is kind of on a busy street. I began walking towards the path that led me into the park while constantly looking behind me. The crackheads were now in their van, rooting around for something. As I made my way further into the park, the sun began fading fast. I was also upset because I really looked forward to walking in the park for stress relief. But the darker it got, I kept worrying that the couple were following me or waiting around the next bend for me. Finally, I gave up any chance of enjoying this stroll and decided to return to my car. This is where it gets doubly odd. As I exited the trees and made my way back to my car, I saw the van. At this point, I was about 2 minutes from my car. The woman was outside the passenger door again, only this time, the man was standing next to her. She began making sharp, high-pitched meowing noises, and then moaning. Then a blue light appeared before my feet and kind of danced back and forth in front of my feet. The guy was holding a flashlight and shining it through the van windows, directly in front of me. Every internal alarm I had was going off, but both the woman and the man were watching me with dead eyes, the woman still meowing. I was too afraid to run back into the trees and risk an incident where no one would be around to help me. I decided to just risk the chance that I might be faster than them, that I could get into my car quicker than they could do whatever it was that they were going to do to me. I began walking at a very fast clip toward my car while keeping an eye on them. As I got 5 feet from my driver's door, the man made a beeline for me, his blue light hitting me in the eyes. He was right at my trunk, heading for my driver's door when I shut it and locked the doors immediately. The woman walked to the passenger door and just stared at me. The guy did the same at my driver door. I flicked the man off and very obviously mouthed the words "fuck you" in slow motion. I started my car and sped off away from the park and returned home. Then I called my family, who are all in different states than me, and told them that I love them and miss them.
Number 5.
I'm quite a loner and like to go on walks just to get some me time. This one night, on the 27th of November, I decided to go on another lengthy walk of mine. There was something eerie this time though, so I had a feeling that the 27th of November is a night that something grotesque was going to happen. And boy, was I right. So, at around 2 AM, I was restless and made my way into the cold with the same feeling of dread I had had earlier on in that day. The first hour of my walk was pretty normal and nothing out of the ordinary, but lo and behold, I had a feeling I was being watched. Bearing in mind it was about 3 AM now, I was sitting on a bench that was in a park that wasn't very well lit. Someone else being in the park was very unlikely, as it's a small town and the only people who would be around at this time are drunk pissheads who do my head in. Anyways, there was no sound coming from a dark figure that caught my eye. He was just standing there, staring in my direction. I looked down at my phone to put my torchlight on and pointed my light towards the dark figure, but to my surprise, he had vanished. Me just being paranoid and extremely tired, I just ignored the weird encounter and decided it would be best to make my way home and get some shut-eye. Placing my phone back into my pocket and lighting up another cigarette, I made my way back to my house but still had the uneasy feeling of someone watching me. I'm normally not easily scared, but this felt different. Like someone had decided to taunt me. I looked behind me to see the same dark-figured man standing right beside a tree just looking my way. Now I know this isn't just something my mind had made up. I shout to the figure, "Hey man, is there a problem?" You could tell there was fear in my voice, but I wasn't going to let this creep get the best of me. No response from him. This is getting weird now. I stood there and my eyes widened. The man got to the floor and started crawling towards me in a manner that I could only describe as insane. The only thing I could hear was this hissing noise, which I presumed was coming from him. I just stood there, wondering what on earth he was going to do to me. In my current state, I just looked at him with fear. As he edged closer, I vaguely noticed something was dangling from his rucksack. I guessed it was some bird or some sort of small creature. Anyway, I didn't want to hang around to find out, so I dashed up a small lane right back to my house. Looking back on the ordeal, maybe I shouldn't have headed straight back to my house as he would know where I lived. But my head was in a messed up place from all the fear that this man had caused me. I ran through my gate to my front door and quickly glanced behind me to find him just standing outside my closed gate. One thing the man said to me will always send chills down my spine to this day.
One day we'll meet again. This time, you'll be coming home with me.
The events of this night stopped me from going on walks because I still, even to this day, 5 years on, fear that he will come back and take me to some sinister place where he could do whatever the hell he wants to me.
Number 4.
My mother's first husband, Jim, was an asshole. I was 10 when they met at church. She was the new in-town single mum, and he was the boyishly handsome drummer of the worship band, and they struck up a relationship. He wasn't what I would call her type, but I think she liked him because he was a sweet laid-back good old boy. He had a steady job, he was good at fixing things, and he at least made the effort to have a relationship with me. On top of that, he was born and raised in the small town we lived in, friend or family to just about everybody. All in all, he was damn good husband material. Then came the troubles. See, Jim was an alcoholic. When he started courting my mum, the drinking wasn't an issue. He had been upfront with her about his status, but he didn't make it a habit of drinking, at least when we were around, and made it clear that it wasn't a part of his life anymore. That changed after the wedding. Apparently, the stresses of married life are simply too much for any sober man to bear. I've met many alcoholics in my life, most of them related to me, and it's a special sort of dread that washes over you as a child when you suddenly realize you're stuck with another one. I know alcoholics are not inherently bad people, but Jim was a lousy alcoholic. This easygoing guy would turn into a raging asshole after just a few PBRs, and when he decided to drink, he made an event of it. Usually, he would storm out of the house after an argument with my mum and tear off into the night, not to be heard from again for days. He would eventually be discovered on the other side of town at his mother's house, half naked and trashed by the fish pond, working his way through a case of cheap beer and riding into town on a lawnmower for more. Upon his return, he would be the picture of remorse, calling himself scum and beg for forgiveness. Not just with us, but with the good Lord above. That was the thing that always bothered me about Jim, how he always felt the need to bring God into it. If we were having a family meeting specifically to discuss his behaviour, he would insist in leading a prayer first. Every time he needed to explain himself, he mentioned conversing with God on the matter beforehand. To him, God wasn't a saviour, or a beacon of hope, or even a crutch. God was a defence attorney. No matter what kind of shit Jim got himself into, God would be on his side to pull him out. But more than that though, and this is what I truly believe, he only seemed to talk about God's mercy and forgiveness, when, in reality, he needed that from my mother and I. As if bringing up Jesus' love would soften our hearts to his struggle. As if, suddenly, we would remember that we were Christians, and good Christians don't stay mad at their husbands. That strategy worked for a while, but the novelty wore off soon enough. He went to AA meetings now and then. He would come home insisting that he was enlightened, reborn, on the road to being clean, but never attended frequently enough to get results. The marriage lasted 7 tense years, punctuated with stress-induced benders every few months, followed by more empty promises. My mum tried to play the supportive Christian wife for a while, before finally giving up and switching to full-on resentment. Their fights were never physical, but they were ugly, and sometimes they got loud enough that I was worried that someone would throw a punch. Finally, my mother ended things with him. The divorce was quick and quiet. But then, I think that they were just tired of each other and were relieved to part ways. She took the house, he took the Chevy Trailblazer, and that was that. My mum recovered nearly overnight and was happy to start her life again. A few months after the divorce, we'd heard that Jim had gotten remarried. Cindy was a friend of ours from church and we had been close for years. Though it was no secret to anyone that she had always had a crush on Jim. Cindy had never been married before, barely even dated, but she had landed her dream guy. Honestly, we couldn't have been happier for her. For Jim's part, my mother and I decided to be optimistic. Maybe he'd really clean up his act if he could hook up with such a good sweet woman as Cindy. A few years pass. I'm well into college by this point, and my mum is living with her new man in a different city. It's been at least a year since we've been back to our small town or spoken to anyone there. One day, I get a message from a friend from high school. "Did you hear about Jim?" I asked her to go on, already rolling my eyes at what it could be. As she started telling me what happened, my smugness turned to horror. Jim and Cindy had been having issues for a while, reportedly over money, and I can guess a few other things. The incident started when Cindy went to Jim's trailer. Apparently she had recently moved out and was returning to pick up some things. Cindy's 22-year-old niece was with her to help. Jim had claimed that he was going into rehab, so they were surprised to walk in and see him sitting there drinking on the couch. The couple began arguing, leading to the woman leaving the house and driving away. Drunk and furious, Jim jumped into his truck and took off after them at full speed. He caught up to them and slammed into Cindy's car, knocking it so hard that it flipped and rolled off of the road. Realizing what he'd done, Jim backed away and sped off in the other direction to hide. Cindy was in a critical condition for days before she was finally declared stable, but her niece died instantly. Jim was found hiding out in some farmland a few hours after the incident and was swiftly charged with murder, DUI, and fleeing the scene, among other things. The city's golden boy had just sunk himself into a whole lot of shit, and not even Christ could get him out of this one. This story is awful and upsetting for a lot of reasons, not the least of which being 2 innocent women were so viciously attacked by this drunk idiot. They all happened to be people I knew, but the one thing that still chills me is the car Cindy was driving was a Chevy Trailblazer, the very same Chevy Trailblazer that Jim got in the divorce. My mum's old car, the car I'd learned to drive in. I can only imagine how fast he was going to hit them hard enough to flip it with his little pickup truck. How angry he had to have been not to even hesitate. And I do wonder how many times my mother and I escaped a similar fate.
Number 3.
My house is right next to a forest, and almost every side has the forest next to it. We only have one neighbour in our area, but they're rarely home. Since we live in such a dense forest, the fact that I'm in Norway, it's pretty much nighttime all day long. We rarely see any sunlight at all in the winter period. What is really creepy though is that the power to our house frequently cuts, which really isn't a surprise or a new thing, since the power goes out almost all the time. But very recently, very strange things start to occur when I'm home alone. It has happened 2 times now, that when the power cuts, it's pitch black, both inside and outside. One time, it was completely dark. I was sitting in my living room on my cell phone, when I suddenly see a flash in my panorama living room window. I take a look outside and see someone at the edge of the woods with a flashlight on his head, I think, looking directly in my window, maybe about 50 meters away. And he's just standing there. I'm a pretty confident guy and not so easily scared around the woods, given that I pretty much grew up here. So I figured I should check up on this guy, since he's on our property. We really don't like people looking in our window, especially not this late in the evening. The power's still out, so I equip my flashlight, my field pants, and my hunting knife, which I always bring for various reasons. I go outside, and I'm heading for the direction where the figure was standing, but there's nothing there. I look around after it, and it's moved further into the woods. I could still see his flashlight. I yelled at him, but no response. I'm kind of jogging towards his position, still trying to get his attention, and tell him that people really aren't supposed to walk here. The closer I get, maybe about 100 meters away from my house, and 50 meters away from the figure, I realize something is off. My flashlight is lighting up the area, but it doesn't light up the person. It sort of goes through him. Now, I'm not that close that I can for sure say that the light doesn't illuminate him, but I stopped. It shook me to the bone. This guy casually stared in our window in the middle of a blackout, didn't react to all my call-outs. Neither did he walk in a normal pattern. His flashlight was almost hovering, and that's when his light just turned off. He just disappeared, and it was all pitch black again. The only light I could see was from my own flashlight. Still pretty shaken up, I hurry my way back to the house and find out that both of the main ports to our barn were completely open. They're always closed since it's winter, and that the floodlight positioned outside was also turned on, which indicated that the power was back. Not really comfortable with the experience I just had, I decided to go to bed with all of the lights on. I had pretty much forgotten about the whole thing when about a year later, about a week from now, the same shit happened again. The power was out, and again, I was in my living room when I saw the same fucking flash from my window. I peeked outside, and I saw the same fucking glow in the woods opening. I then remembered the occurrence last year, and I just froze. No way in hell was I going out there again. I locked all the doors, got my flashlight and my knife, and locked myself into my bedroom. The power was back on in half an hour or so, and I have never been so afraid. I'm not sure who or what the thing in the woods opening is, or why it only appears when the lights are out, but I'm not sure if I want to know either. The experience didn't make me afraid of the woods. I still roam it late at night, but I am more afraid of being in my house when it's dark. I would much rather be out in the forest.
Number 2.
A few years ago, I lived near a large expanse of national forest that was riddled with small winding trails and a larger set of roads that had been set up for forestry. It was about a half-a-mile walk from my home over to the Red Road, as I like to call it, a relatively well-kept lava rock pathway. Regardless of the season, even in the beginnings of a snowstorm, I still spent at least an hour a day out there. When I got a puppy, I easily integrated him into my walks. Whippets love following a bike, or hitting up a bike trail, sun, rain or snow. He would follow me soundlessly, generally on a leash while near the houses, then off leash when I got deep into the woods. He was like my shadow, and though he would occasionally bound ahead, he would stop and turn back to look at me when he got a bit far ahead. One day, I was out later in the day. The sun was starting to set and it had grown chilly, to the point that I had put a coat on my dog from out of my pack and decided to cut my trip short. As I was nearing civilization, I called my dog to me and leashed him up, thinking that I may have heard a car. We rounded the corner, coming out of the copse of trees and into the open ground. I slow my walk instantly when I see an older black car parked near the entrance where the pavement turns to gravel. People would occasionally park near the entrance, but for some reason, this car causes me to pause. It's a bright black with oversized silver rims and a small spoiler on the back. There's a man with a baseball cap leaning against the open passenger side window. He's gesturing violently to the people in the car, and he speaks to them in angry tones, although I'm too far away to hear what he's saying. But it's enough that I instantly decide to steer clear of the group. Unfortunately, there's no way out but the path that they are parked on. My dog is a little spooked and is pushing against my legs and looking up at me. It doesn't help settle my nerves. I've seen people park there before, I reason, but I get the distinct impression that they may be dealing something. I don't want to be caught in the middle, so I skirt along the road as far from the vehicle as I can. Even then, walking on the edges of the trees, they turn to look at me, and their angry voices cease momentarily. I hear them saying something about my dog, but I just keep walking, doing what I can to ignore them. I feel my heart rattling in my chest for reasons that I'm unsure of. Something feels off about them, but I'm unsure. Once they're out of earshot, and I've walked quite a distance from them, I put my headphones back in, trying to lessen my nervousness. I'm looking down at the pavement, trying to refocus myself when my dog begins to pull back on the leash. I give him a light tug forward and tell him to heel. I keep walking, feeling strange, making my pace a little more brisk. Again, my dog pulls on the leash. I frown at him in annoyance, unaccustomed to his disobedience. I pull him forward one more time, but this time, when I see his head turn back to look behind us, it catches my attention. I rip out my headphones and stare back the way we came. My dog lets out a high-pitched yip, looking back and then up at me. The man with the baseball cap is a short ways behind us. I grip the leash tighter and instantly spin around, quickly leading my dog toward the subdivision where the houses are. I figure the guy is just walking home, no big deal. But that doesn't do anything to dispel the slight edge of panic I'm beginning to feel. Something isn't right. The whippet keeps looking back and I have to tug him along. The hair bristles on his back and he lets out a few fearful yips. My dog rarely barks and he loves strangers, so his reaction only feeds my inner paranoia. I steal a glance over my shoulder and realize, much to my horror, he's getting closer. I can see his face more clearly, though he's still a distance away. I begin to rationalize that I'm simply being paranoid. Despite this thought, I reach my hand behind me and into my pack, fishing my cell out of the side pocket and slipping it in my jeans. The man's presence is making me anxious, so I take the first right onto a gravel road that isn't even mine. I feel a rush of relief, thinking he'll head straight on the main road and it'll be fine. But it isn't fine. I hear the crunch of gravel behind me and the dog is yanking wholeheartedly at the leash. My adrenaline suddenly whooshes into my bloodstream and I feel my hands get clammy. No, he must live down this road, I think, trying to soothe myself. It's a loop, the road I picked, so I know that it goes back to the main road, toward where I live. But as I near the end of the loop, I chance a glance back. The man in the baseball cap and the dark shirt, he's still behind me, keeping his distance, but still seemingly closer than before. Full-blown panic erupts. I know now that he appears to be following me. For what intent, I don't know. I can try to get to a house, but most of them have fences and gates, and people don't take too well to trespassers. I quickly pull my phone out of my pocket and flip it open, selecting home. It rings several times, making my blood pump erratically. My mum is home, but disabled, and often gets tired and falls asleep. It's about to go to the voicemail, but she picks up, sounding groggy. "Someone's following me," I blurt out as quietly as I can. She instantly asks me where I am and I whisper it into the phone, carefully glancing over my shoulder. He's very close now, maybe 15 feet, and my dog is going crazy. She says she'll be right there. I walk as fast as I can without running, and I realize that the man behind me is also walking faster, and instead of increasing the distance between us, it remains the same. The houses are far from the gravel road, so I don't know where to go. I could try to get up to a house and pound on a door, but then I wonder about that black car and if they have something to do with it. What if he calls them and they come too? I am panicking, but I know my mum isn't far from me, so I start to jog, and my dog is keeping up, but constantly looking back. Suddenly, a large truck comes into view. A huge wave of dust is pluming behind it. It comes to a very rapid halt in front of me, and I look back to see the man in the baseball cap sprinting into the yard to the left, running over to someone's lawn and then disappearing behind a house. My mum is getting out of the truck and comes over to me, saying breathlessly, "Is that him? Is that the guy that was following you?" I nod. There's no sight of him now though. He's gone, having fled between the houses and probably out to the main road. We get into the truck and my mum is red-faced and panicked, but seems to be slowly calming down. "I don't want you to go out anymore," she says, looking over at me. She starts driving home, but I can't help wondering if that man with the baseball cap will be standing out in the road. When I look back, the gravel path is empty, except for the haze of dust we've left behind. I don't go out for weeks. When I finally convince my mum to let me go, I have to pack a knife in my bag to placate her. Even then, every time I walk to the open trail where I saw the black car, I always get nervous and somewhat angry. Angry that a stranger tried to make me afraid of the one thing I really love.
Number 1.
The events in this part take place around a month after the events at the compound. Since storming out of the house after having A and B around to review the horrifying picture we had taken in the biggest building of the military base, B and I haven't heard much out of A. In fact, I'd say it seemed like he was actively avoiding us. Both B and I have seen him out and about, but every time we try to catch up to him or make eye contact, A just seems to slip away. After failed attempts of trying to make contact through phone call or text, I one day tried to contact him through social media, but I found that I didn't have his name come up in my search. Thinking that he may just have blocked me, I contacted a mutual friend who confirmed that they could also not find A's social media accounts. It seemed that A had completely deleted himself from the internet. Quite a remarkable feat in today's interconnected, data-hungry world. I had been concerned about A ever since he seemed to completely change personality and walk out on us. But through life's demands, I got busy and didn't have much time to catch up with him or B, so the concern slipped to the back of my mind. One morning though, I woke up and randomly thought of A and how he must be doing, and the idea of going to see him suddenly popped into my head. I wasn't doing anything else, so it would be a great excuse to just get out of the house anyway. After procrastinating for a couple of hours, I finally made the effort to go and get showered and changed, and then headed out my door on the way to A's. It didn't take me long to reach A's house, although a part of me did wonder if he still lived there as I approached his windows, as the front main room looked dark and empty. I knocked on the door and waited. No answer. I knocked again and waited. No answer. Screw it, last attempt to knock. I started repeatedly knocking the door before hearing quick shuffling from inside. Bingo. I heard the mechanisms inside the door unlock as it only opened slightly to reveal darkness in A's right eye. He looked stunned to see me there, but he didn't open the door any further.
See?
A stuttered.
What are you doing here? You shouldn't be here. Go away.
That was a hell of a greeting. I thought I'd drop by and see how you are. I haven't heard from you since that morning where we discussed our findings, I explained with mild concern.
I'm fine.
A hissed.
Now you can go.
Hold fire there, kiddo, I harshly retorted. I made an effort to see you. I'm not just going to walk away without having a catch-up, so you're either going to have to let me in or I can just stand here. I didn't plan on standing there for much longer though, if I'm honest. The gap in the door increased as A slowly stepped out to get a good look at me, then a bit more forward to survey the street, before motioning me to go inside. What struck me first was how A had let himself go. It looked like he hadn't cut his hair or shaved, and he had dirt on his face, hands, and fingernails. He also had the demeanor of a person who was being followed. No offense, man, but you look like shit. I sniffed as I walked in and hung up my jacket. And you don't exactly smell pleasant either,
If you're just going to insult me, you can leave.
A said. Once we were both inside and I had sat down at the table, I looked at A to find out that he was already looking at me, like he was waiting for me to make the next move. What? I asked him.
What do you mean, what?
A questioned harshly.
Why are you here, C?
I would have liked to have thought that the reason why I was there would have been clear, and he would have at least acknowledged how he had fallen off the face of the earth to us. But no. It seemed the idea hadn't even popped into his mind. The atmosphere was quite tense. I'm going to get straight to the point.
Good. I'm glad you're deciding to be considerate with your conversation at least.
A interrupted brashly. Hey, will you fucking... I stopped myself from getting angry about his attitude and decided to just get out what I needed to. Why are you avoiding us?
Avoiding you?
A looked at me in befuddlement.
Who says I've been avoiding you?
You haven't bothered with B and I since that night. I went on to explain. What happened? Did we do something to you?
I don't have a clue what you're on about.
A dismissed.
Quite frankly, you're wasting my time.
I can feel anger start to build up within me the more I looked at A. As I looked away to compose myself and gather some valid argument ammunition, my eyes clocked onto something in A's conservatory. What is that? I began as I got up slowly and walked into the conservatory to bring the object into view. A quickly sprang into action to try and block me as I saw clearly what was on the conservatory table.
Yeah, I didn't say you could move. It's none of your business.
A began before I interrupted him. A Ouija board? I gasped, noticing A stop dead in his tracks like he had been caught red-handed. A, what the fuck, man? Why do you have a Ouija board? My eyes could hardly believe what they were seeing. I had seen plenty of horror movies and heard my fair share of creepypastas involving Ouija boards, but I had never physically seen one before. The board was laid out on the table, fully set up and waiting for someone to sit down and play. The planchette sat patiently, waiting in the middle. I was particularly intrigued, but also felt the atmosphere turn a bit ominous. I also noticed, sat next to the Ouija board, was the antique box A had found during his solo exploration of the compound. Why did you take that box, A? I wondered out loud. A seemed startled by this question.
What do you mean, why did I take the box?
A's befuddled face returned.
It was a souvenir of our night.
Yeah, but out of everything you could have possibly found around the place, you choose some old wooden box? Why? I probed.
Unlike you, I have a particular taste for antique stuff.
A condescended. I found myself laughing at his statement. A was a massive technophile and only had a love for modern-day objects. So much that it made the antique box and the Ouija board look very out of place in his house. Since when did you have a taste for antique stuff? I chuckled. A, you're full of shit, man.
This is why I don't fucking talk to you. All you do is laugh and criticize at everything I say and do.
He said quite aggressively. That's because everything you say and do doesn't make fucking sense, I said sternly. As I continued, my voice grew louder. You haven't called, you haven't texted, you've disappeared from Twitter and Facebook. You don't respond to our invitations to go hang out, and we know that you are actively trying to avoid us out and about. Don't lie and say that you don't know what I'm on about, as you've just acknowledged you don't want to talk to me. It's frustrating, man. If you don't want us to bother you, then just say and we'll fuck off and leave you to enjoy your depressing loneliness. I instantly regretted saying what I just did. A had no comeback and just stood there, thinking to himself. I noticed his face change to a look of sorrow, like I had made him realize the extent of his isolation. I felt like I needed to change the conversation. So, why the Ouija board anyway, eh? I questioned, calmly. For the first time in this encounter, Ace seemed open to converse as he grabbed a chair and sat at the table.
I don't know. I was just interested in seeing if they were real.
A explained, not making eye contact and fiddling with his hands. You do realize the risks involved with them, right? I said in a concerned tone. A nodded. After a moment of silence, A's home phone began to ring in the other room. A quickly got up and ran into the other room, leaving me alone and out of sight. As A began the conversation on the phone, I began to earwig, but not long before A had closed the door to the other room like he knew I'd been earwigging. I was just sat down trying to decipher the blur of voice coming from the other room, but all I could tell was that it sounded quite serious. As time grew on, I felt my attention drawn to the Ouija board in the conservatory. Taking one quick peek at the door A had exited to go into the other room, I walked over to the Ouija board and gave it a look over. I thought for a moment about the number of negative stories that are tied to this very game, and I could still hardly believe that I had one right in front of me. I could sympathize with A. The urge to play it and find out how real the stories are was overwhelming. One thing I knew for certain was how dangerous they could be. But a touch couldn't hurt, could it? I placed my finger feebly onto the planchette, half expecting it to move, but it didn't, so I placed my finger from the other hand on. I think I was hooked in at this point. Well, I've got this far. May as well give it a try. I'll just have to make sure I close the connection once I'm finished. I kept my fingers still, but light enough for any unseen forces to be able to move the planchette. There was no movement. I guess I'm going to have to call out if I want anything to happen. Do I want to do this? Hello? Is there anybody there? Please move the planchette to make yourself known. I felt a bit silly talking to thin air. The planchette began to move. My whole body jumped away when this happened as it felt so unnatural. My body wouldn't have reacted like that if I knew it was going to move like that. Did I just make contact? Bad idea removing my fingers from the board. I quickly put my fingers back on before continuing to carry on the conversation with my new otherworldly companion. I apologize for jumping like that. I hope you can forgive me. Who are you? The planchette started moving again in a figure of 8 motion, repeating and slowly increasing in speed and intensity. I'm sorry, I don't understand. Are you trying to talk to me? What's your name? After a moment of continued figure 8 movements, the planchette started moving towards letters and continuously spelled out Z-O-Z-O. Pause. Z-O-Z-O. Zozo? I confirmed. That's your name? Not even a millisecond after the question left my mouth did the planchette quickly hover to yes, and then return to the figure of 8 movements. Thank you, Zozo. My name is C. I thought I should at least be polite. My mind went blank and I couldn't think of another question. My friend in the other room, his name is A. I improvised. Have you ever spoken to him? The planchette hovered over to yes once more, returning to the usual motion. I was trying to think of another question, but not before the board began to spell out something else. R-D-R-E. I don't understand. R-D-A-R. I apologize, Zozo. I don't understand. R-A-D-A-R. Those words hit me like a knife to the chest. It knows we went to the compound. Radar? What about a radar? You know we went to the radar sign? The planchette moved swiftly to yes, and then spelt out A's name. What's A got to do with the radar site, Zozo? R-I-C-H-A-R-D. Richard? I don't know a Richard. CRT? I felt like Zozo was trying to tell me something, but it made no sense whatsoever. P-H-O-T-O-S. Photos. Did it mean my photos? U-N-D-E-R-S-T-A-N-D. It spelt understand 3 times. I wasn't sure what to say to Zozo next. I was left stunned by what had just come out of the board. The planchette, which had been continuously doing the figure 8 motion, suddenly moved and hovered over to goodbye. All motion on the board ceased. Whatever I had been communicating with had gone. Goodbye, Zozo. Thank you for talking with me. I felt like I had to be safe and quickly did a circular motion on the board before moving the planchette to goodbye, and then lifting it from the board and placing it off the board to the side. Not long after I said goodbye and sat back down at the table, A walked back in, looking white as a ghost. I heard him whispering under his breath,
This can't be happening. This can't be happening.
"Everything okay, A?" I asked, concerned. It seemed A forgot I was there as my voice cut into the whispering and startled him.
You're going to have to leave for real now, C.
A demanded, calmly, not making eye contact and grabbing his chair with both hands.
My mum is in hospital. She's been hurt bad by a car that went through a red light. This can't be happening. Not now, please. Not now.
"Oh no," I exclaimed. This news shocked me as I got on well with A's mum. "Anything I can do, A, let me know."
Thanks, C.
A replied gratefully.
But I'd rather you just leave me alone.
I did just that. On the way home, I couldn't help thinking about everything that just happened at A's house. His behavior had changed. He had become this quiet, dismissive hermit when before he'd been loud and always up for a fun time. On top of that, it was disturbing to know that he had begun using a Ouija board. I'd always heard of stories of people who use it regularly end up going insane. Using the Ouija board once was enough for me, as I was in awe of the response I received for the first time. But I kept questioning what they meant. Radar, Richard, CRT, understand. I felt like the responses were linked and not just random words, but I had no clue on how to make the connection. Did A get the same responses when he used the board? The timing of the goodbye on the board and A's return into the room was also impeccable, as well as the news about his mum. I had an annoying, nudging feeling in the back of my subconscious. Were the events all linked? What was A up to? G'day mates, it's B-Buster here. So before the video starts, I just wanted to give you guys a quick update regarding some stuff going on here on YouTube and with me. So, long story short guys, YouTube's been unsubbing people from channels because of what appears to be some sort of algorithm change. Personally, I'm still not sure about what all of this is about yet, but I do know that to help try and prevent this, weekend is like you get to the channel. If you want, it's a heads up to these things. And with all of this said,
Number 8.
I feel absolutely insane sharing this, but a man stands at the foot of my bed every night, and he has been doing this ever since I could remember. Even though he's always given me super bad vibes, I used to try to be optimistic and chalk it up to being a good spirit, or a guardian angel, but I know what being around good spirits is like. And after this past year, I know that's definitely not what he or it is. This sounds really weird, but it's almost like he's kind of protective of me. He usually gets more active if I talk about or start thinking about what's happening, or if I bring my boyfriend over. I can tell immediately when he's pissed, and it almost gets so bad to the point where my fight or flight response kicks in, and I have to leave my house to get my anxiety to chill out. It started to get worse about 6 months ago, and I made the awesome decision of trying to cleanse my house with some sage to try and calm him down a bit. Nothing too extreme, right? You thought. It was a really nice spring day, sunny, beautiful, no wind. The weather you would imagine a really nice music video to be shot in. I invited my extremely skeptical boyfriend over for company and help. We started opening up all the doors and windows in the house in preparation. Nothing weird. It was honestly really pleasant. It was even fine when I cleansed the first room in my house. But when I went to the second room is when things started getting weird. There was a loud noise in the other room, which turned out to be an empty coat rack. That was about 1.5 feet away on the floor from its original position. We were both kind of spooked, but chalked it up to the wind and kept going. There was only one room left to cleanse, and the vibe of my house immediately did a 180. As I walked to the third room of my house, my dogs, who had been hanging out in the living room, very swiftly left my house with their ears back and their tails down. My boyfriend and I walked into the third room. I wanted to throw up. Something felt so wrong. I could tell that my skeptic boyfriend was unsettled also, so I made light-hearted conversation. That made it better for about 20 seconds. Then he and I both witnessed the door to the room we were in being slammed shut. It wasn't a vacuum from anywhere else in the house due to all the doors and the windows being open. There was no wind that day, and there was no gradual build-up in velocity of the shutting of the door like a vacuum effect in houses that can do that to doors. The only way I can describe it is being violently slammed shut, as if someone was really, really pissed. I thought my boyfriend was going to shit his pants. He made us leave the house immediately. Needless to say, he wasn't skeptic after that day. More things happened after that. That's another can of worms for a different day. No, this isn't a joke. It's not a creepypasta. I don't have any psychological problems and I'm not religious. I'm just a regular person who just so happened to stumble upon this place and decided to finally share a tiny portion of this whole thing out. Which this is just a tiny portion. There's so much more. But I know if I think or talk about this, more strange things are going to start happening again. I just wanted to finally get this off my chest and maybe get some advice or answers for people that have gone through stuff like this. Because honestly, I don't know what to do.
Number 7.
I have quite a few stories of creepy or bizarre encounters, usually taking place on public transport, or involving catcallers, perverts that wouldn't leave me alone. This one involves neither of those, and is one of the more creepy things that I've dealt with. This happened just over 2 years ago, during my first year at sixth form college. I was 16 at the time, I'm now 19. I usually got the bus home since I was studying art and psychology, among other things, which usually meant I would be carrying some pretty heavy sketchbook as well as a couple of heavy binders full of notes. And I have back and chest problems, which meant I couldn't carry heavy stuff for too long. On days when I didn't have to bring as much stuff home, I would usually walk. It was about a half an hour walk between my college and my house, and I usually walked home with a friend. On this particular day, however, she had got a ride home from another friend, so I was walking by myself. It was also winter, so it was already dark by the time I set off home. To get to my house, I would usually walk through a park. I could either go through the actual park area, but that usually added around 20 minutes to my journey, since it was a pretty big park. But there was also a pretty densely wooded area between the park and a housing estate, with a dirt path running through it, which is the route I usually took home since it shaved about 10 minutes off my journey. Lots of people walk their dogs along the route, so I didn't really feel worried about walking that way. I usually just listened to music and walked on autopilot until I got to the main road. Because of how dark it was and how dense the trees were, it was really dark while I was walking down the path. It took me a while to realize it since I was walking fast and not paying much attention. But I noticed that there was a light flickering up ahead, partially hidden by the trees. As I got closer, I realized that the light was coming from a fire. In the middle of the woodland area, there was a bonfire, and a man standing by it, side onto the dirt path and staring into the fire. He was pretty far away and I couldn't see him very well, but I could see that there was something in his hand. It was white. Probably a letter or a photograph or something, and he was throwing something else into the fire. There were 2 black trash bags on the ground near him. If it wasn't for the light of the fire, I wouldn't have seen them. I thought it was kind of suspicious, but we weren't too far from a residential area, so I assumed that he was burning some old letters or bills, bank statements, whatever, stuff with personal information on them that you couldn't just throw away. In all honesty, it was weird, but I didn't think too much of it and just kept walking. It would only take me a few minutes to get to the road near the residential area, and then it was a 5-minute walk or so to my house. I was near the tree line when I glanced over my shoulder and saw the man standing in the middle of the dirt path, about 25 feet behind me. He hadn't put the fire out since I could still see the light from it through the trees. He started walking towards me, slowly at first, before starting to run, shouting something at me, but I couldn't tell what he was saying. Luckily, I hadn't stopped walking while looking back, and I was already close to the main residential road, so I sped up and crossed. I rounded a corner and hid behind a fence, and glanced up to see him looking around before going back into the tree line. I made it home quickly, without further incident. After that, when I walked by myself, I stopped cutting through the wooded area, and took the longer route through the park instead. I never saw that man again, and since I'm attending a different course at a different school, and no longer visit that park, I doubt I ever will.
Number 6.
So I'm a male nurse at a large hospital in San Francisco. I work in the ER, and as is custom, Thanksgiving night, it was very busy. Now, my wife is also a nurse for the same hospital. She works in labor and delivery. Between babies being born left and right, and the people coming into the ER, we hadn't had a chance to take a break together as we try to do every shift. So when she called, I figured it was to say that she wanted to meet up for a bit to eat in the cafeteria. When I answered, I heard in the background a male voice, screaming profanities in the background. And my wife, who was fluent in Spanish, trying to calm this guy down. She told me their pager wasn't working and they needed security, stat. I quickly hung up, called for security, told my fellow nurses what was going on, and ran for labor and delivery, worried sick about my wife. When I got there, I ran almost square smack dab into this visibly angry man. He wasn't huge, but bro definitely worked out and not at a gym. He was covered in prison tattoos, and he was obviously a banger. I worked out regularly, but I knew that this guy could kick my ass. He looked at me, gave me this sick grin, and started heading towards me, spouting off in Spanish. I don't speak fluent Spanish, but what I could understand scared the living shit out of me. I'm backing up as fast as I can. I start buzzing the door to the ER frantically for them to let me in. This guy's literally a foot away from me, and the door's open, and I'm pulled into safety by a doctor. Gangbanger punches the door a few times, makes a dragging sign across his throat while grinning at us both. Next thing I know, police rush into the corridor he's in. I finally make it to my wife, who, thankfully, was shaken up but unhurt. She explained to me what had happened. A young girl, only 14, came in, high fever, vomiting, distended belly. The banger claimed that he was her brother and they needed to cut her open to get a baby. They did an ultrasound, and to their horror, they realized that she wasn't pregnant. She had bags of drugs in her stomach. It's very common for drug mules to bring over young women from Mexico carrying drugs that way. Homeboy freaked out when they informed him his sister needed emergency surgery, and no, he wasn't getting his drugs. Thankfully, the girl survived, but the sad thing is, she'll most likely be deported once she recovers.
Number 5.
I'm a female corrections officer, prison guard or CO, in a state with a relatively high number of death row inmates. However, few executions are actually carried out. I used to work for a large county, but I work for a different agency now. This county was my first CO job years ago, and before that, I had worked in retail and customer service while studying criminal justice. So, I was really green. I used to be very liberal. I'm still liberal about a lot of things, but the job does change your perspective for most people. One thing that I used to believe very strongly was that no human being could be truly evil. This particular county jail is one of the oldest in the country, so parts of it have a totally linear layout. What I mean is that you have a long stretch of corridor with cells on either side, and the COs have to walk up and down to supervise the inmates. As you can imagine, these linear layouts are not in style anymore because you can't see every cell at the same time, but every inmate can see you. I have to say that units like this are extremely creepy too. I'm going to call this corridor the condos. We didn't call it that, obviously, but I don't want to share the exact term which is specific to this jail. Less than 10 years ago, a quadruple stabbing homicide happened not too far from where I grew up. The murderer, Michaels, described it as a butchering, and he killed his former girlfriend, her family, and their neighbour. When the police found Michael soaked in blood and asked him what had happened, he said,
It's obvious. I just killed everyone.
The cops said that he seemed completely emotionless when he said it. At that time, I'd only been a CO for about 4 months, and our facility received him as a pre-trial detainee. Now, obviously, he wasn't our first or only murder, but the nature of the crime, stabbings indicating a more dangerous personality than a shooting for one thing, and his lack of remorse was horrifying. He was considered a volatile inmate, so we placed him in an observation cell in the middle of the condos where a CO could always keep an eye on him. He would stand at his glass door in silence most of the day, just watching everyone. I swear he only really spoke when he had visits. He actually had a full visits list of these big goth girls who would come in and swear that they were in love with him. I don't know if this means anything, but his ex was a big girl, and he used to draw pictures of the fat female COs. For note, he was skinny and white, with brown hair. One day, I was working as a utilities officer, basically a floater who relieves people for breaks and helps out as needed. At this jail, utility officers also got away with a ton of downtime and bullshitting. I was hanging out at one of the end of the condos where you could look down and see a lot of the jail, talking to another officer on duty. As they say, there are no secrets in jail. Plus, I was aware that there were points throughout the jail where you could hear very well into neighbouring cells, that sort of thing. We were being pretty quiet though. Plus, we stood a good 50 yards from Michael's observation cell. Also, you have to imagine that it would be difficult to stand in the observation cell and press your face against the glass to see the people standing at the right angle so far from you. I was telling the other CO a funny story about my weekend, which I wouldn't do out on a correctional unit nowadays. But we weren't getting into anything too personal either. It was a long story involving my fiancée at the time. I wrapped up talking to this CO because I had to go to the gate to relieve another officer for chow, and I had to pass Michael's cell. I didn't like walking past it because he stood there and stared at you, and back then I wasn't so good at hiding my nervousness. He always had his head slightly tilted down so you could see the white under the irises of his eyes. Again, rarely saying a word, but today was different. I took one step past his door and I heard him say Edgecombe in a barely audible whisper. I didn't even know that he knew my name. Yes, our last names are on our uniforms, but I was never his primary officer and we'd never interacted. It caught me off guard, so instead of ignoring it, it stopped me in my tracks and I backpedaled to the door. He pointed to his mouth and I leaned in to listen. His eyes looked so dark. I remember I felt hypnotized. He proceeded to recite, word for word, the story I had just quietly told the other officer at the end of the condos less than 2 minutes before, even copying the sound of my voice down to a subtle lisp. This seemed to go on forever. I felt like we were the only two there. No 22mm of glass protecting me. Just a 5-foot-tall female and a murderer. I remember thinking, for the first time, of another human being. This is evil and unfixable. Finally, I said, "Sir, did you need something?" And he just started to laugh hysterically, and I walked away. I have been assaulted by other inmates. I've had piss thrown in my eyes. People play mind games with me constantly. I've met some damn good lip readers too, but this was like something else. Now, I work at a maximum security institution, where I babysit all rapists and murderers and pedophiles. I don't know how to make this make sense to you, that this was the one and only time in my life where I felt inside of me like I was dealing with something not human. Michaels is in another institution now. He's on death row. He refuses to appeal. He made it clear to the press that this decision is not out of remorse. He has none. He just doesn't give a shit, and it is most logical in his mind for him to die.
Number 4.
This is the most traumatic incident of my life. It still haunts me after 5 years. Although I grew up in the capital of my country, my family owns a house in one of the many islands. My grandmother grew up there. We inherited the house. This island is extremely beautiful, and we went there for vacation every summer. Let me give you some info about the locals. They are very different from residents of other islands, mainly because of history. The island was not populated until pirates started dropping off their women and children that they had kidnapped there. They returned, often to rape them, and this resulted in the island being populated by people that were products of rape. On top of that, there is a specific village with a strange aura around it. They say the residents of the village are full of incest. I believe that it is true, because there are a lot of retarded or odd people living there. So, you understand, the population of the island in general was developed on a messed up basis. Funnily enough, it's a highly popular tourist destination worldwide, and if you are not from there, or don't spend much time there, you probably wouldn't get it. Anyway, I was 16, and my sister was 14. We were spending our summer there, going to the beach and then going out. We were both too young to understand certain things, plus the crime rate in the island is pretty low, and they are generally considered safe. So, our parents were calm about us going out until late at night. I should also mention now that it was 2011, so we had cell phones but not smartphones. We also didn't have any credit to make phone calls. That was usual for teenagers at this time, because it was expensive and we didn't have a lot of pocket money, so we were often without credit. One night, we were hanging around the port where we lived when we met a group of local people. They were all about 20 years old and very friendly, so we were happy that they hung around with us. There were 5 of them, 3 guys and 2 girls that were sisters. Their names were Manos, Takis, Stavros, Tina and Elsa. The girls looked like blonde models, while the guys were the typical local youths with scooters. We were drinking when they suggested that we go to their village, the one I mentioned before, to hang out around in the girls' house. The girls had a car, so they drove us there, and the boys followed with their scooters. When we entered the house, me and my sister both realized that there was something wrong. It was dirty, and there was a bad smell coming from the backyard. I wanted to leave, but I didn't want to appear rude. Also, we didn't have a car. The house was small. The girls showed us around. When we reached the bedroom of their parents, there was bloodstains on the bed. Tina quickly changed the sheets, explaining that their dad got into a fight recently and was bleeding everywhere. She talked like it was normal. I could feel my younger sister's fear next to me. The guy sat in the living room, smoking a joint. They offered us, but we politely refused. Both of us felt like we needed to be sober so we could figure out a way to get away from this place. Everybody pushed us to smoke though, to the point where we couldn't say no. So, I took a puff, but I didn't breathe the smoke down. But my sister didn't know this trick, and she got high very fast. At that point, I was scared. I had to get us out of there. Takis came to sit next to me, talking to me in a flirty way. Stavros did the same to my sister. She was too high to resist. I watched panicked while they were kissing and he was touching her private parts. I was pushing Takis away, saying I have a boyfriend, which was a lie, but he didn't care. I was so scared. Then, the sister sat close to Manos and both started kissing him. At that point, I stood up and went to the bathroom. My mind was working like crazy, but the smell of the bathroom was awful. There was a second door to the backyard. I carefully opened the door. The smell became unbearable. I felt like vomiting. There were piles of trash. I got closer, and there, near the trash, there was a dead cat. To make things worse, the body was surrounded by her kittens, also dead. I vomited on the trash, but I decided to have a closer look. And the cat did not die a natural death. She was stabbed with a knife in the belly. I quickly realized the kittens died unborn. I freaked out so much, I almost fainted. My mind was telling me to run. There was indeed an exit from the backyard that would lead me to the main street, but I had to find a way to get my sister and escape. Shit! All this time my sister was there in the living room alone and high. I rushed back in, trying to look normal. When I entered the living room, everybody was close to my sister, touching her. Their hands were inside her pants, while the guys were starting to take their clothes off. She was sobering up at this point, and she was freaking out. She was saying, "Please, no, I don't want to." Manos told her to shut up and that she'll like it. I just stood there. I couldn't move. Packer stood up suddenly to bring me into their twisted game. Then something happened that I'll forever be grateful of. My sister said she needs to vomit. And it was true. She was pale and she could barely hold it back. Nobody wanted vomit on them, so they instantly let her go. She rushed to the bathroom and I went after her. She vomited and then, without saying anything, I grabbed her arm and dragged her out. She was in a really bad state, almost fainting. We rushed to the exit of the backyard and then to the main street. We had no credit on our phone, so I stopped a woman and asked to make a phone call. I called my parents to pick us up and, obviously, they were very alarmed. I had to explain to them what happened. They were terrified. The next few years, we were not allowed to do a lot of things until they finally calmed down. It was stupid to follow some strangers, but we were naive teenagers. When I think about the danger that we put ourselves in, though, I still shiver. My parents thought about calling the police, but it was not very safe. We found out that the girl's father was dealing drugs. My country has a very high level of corruption, and police are rarely dependable, or even an option. So, we just rented out the house and never came back for vacation. Since then, my sister and I are way more suspicious and careful. I am happy we escaped and learned our lesson, but I wish we had never have met them.
Number 3.
When I was 3, my parents moved us into a new neighborhood. The house was nice, but kind of old. The neighborhood was an old 50s track home area, so it had a pretty varied group of people living there, from older groups that had bought the houses new, to young families looking for a cheap place to live, to poor people looking for cheap houses to rent. As soon as we moved in, my dad started noticing weird things about me. He would hear me giggling and laughing in my own room. Whenever he went in and asked what was so funny, I would tell him that the kids were being funny. He would also come in and wake me up and find me curled up in the closet. This happened over and over again. My parents didn't think much of it because I was a pretty imaginative kid. The thing that wigged them out the most, however, was that I flat out refused to walk out the front door. I would scream, yell, and cry until one of my parents carried me in and out of the house. When you walked in the front door, to the right there was a closet, and to the left there was a low brick wall that separated the front door from the living room. It was about 4 feet high and about 3 feet long. Just a room divider, but I never wanted to touch it or be near it. After we had lived there for a few months, my dad started making some renovations to the house. Among them was demolishing that wall. My parents dropped my brother and I off with our grandparents the day that they were going to do it so that we wouldn't be underfoot. We didn't end up going home for a week. When my dad knocked down the wall, he called the police. Inside the brick wall were bones that had turned out to be from children. To my knowledge, the cops never figured out who put them there. The house had been owned by a lot of people, many of them who had rented it out, so it just remained one of the many weird things that happened in my town that was never figured out.
Number 2.
When I was about 12, my great uncle John came from Ukraine to visit us in Canada. He had a lot of stories, but this one was the one that stood out. In the late 1960s, John was travelling by train from his village to another to visit family. He had to change I was around 17 years old when this happened. I'm 28 now. For some context, I was a poor high school student studying in a town located around 300 kilometers from my home. Back then I lived in rural Moldavian Republic and studied in Romania, where I had a scholarship to cover most of my expenses. After winter vacation had ended, I was returning from my home by train. Now, the train station was a really desolated place. There weren't any apartment buildings for almost a 1 kilometer radius or so. The train arrived at 11 PM and the buses circulated until around 11 PM. This was Romania, so no actual reliable schedule. I was alone, and there was a significant walking distance from the train station to my high school campus dorm, but taking a taxi was far too expensive for me back then, and I didn't want to bother any of my friends or colleagues. So the stupid teenager I was proceeds to think I can simply walk to the nearest bus station, and if I'm lucky, I'll get a bus. If not, then I'll just walk to the campus, around an hour's walk. I got out of the train, and it was a cold, dark night. The area around the train station was completely desolated, except for a few Romani shacks, gypsies if you're more familiar with this term, scattered around. I proceed to start walking towards the campus. After a few minutes, I think I hear something behind me, and I get a dreadful feeling. I ignore it and start walking faster. A few more seconds pass and I can hear someone calling to me in a raspy voice.
Hey, beauty. Why in such a hurry? Wait for me.
I am really creeped out, but I can't find the courage to look behind me, so I start walking even faster. The guy behind me keeps up. I can now hear his footsteps. I get scared and proceed to walk the fastest I can without actually running. I hear him behind me.
Now that's not nice. Where do you think you're going?
I turn my head and see a dirty, shaggy man looking in his 30s. At this point, I am really scared. Beyond trying to keep my calm scared, the area around me is pitch black and silent. There are no houses, no people, and even no streets that have any traffic around, and I don't have a cell phone. This happened more than 10 years ago in Romania, and I was poor. I proceeded to run. I run as fast as I can towards the nearest populated street I can think of. I can hear him running behind me, and not only keeping up, but catching up on me. I reach the nearest circulated street, and he is 2 steps behind me, yelling angrily.
Where do you think you're going?
2 seconds pass by, and I see a small bus passing by. I was nowhere near a bus station, but I started moving my hands and gesturing frantically, trying to get the bus driver to stop. Happily, he noticed me and stopped, and just as I closed the door, still panicking, I see the guy grabbing at the door trying to open it, but it's too late. The bus starts moving away. I thank the bus driver profusely. He said he noticed the guy running behind me and that I was in a panic, and that's why he stopped. I'm not a religious person, but damn, it felt like someone was looking after me and sent the bus in the nick of time to save me. Back in 2007, I started a tech job with an IP, phone, VoIP, DT1, long-distance company. The company is no longer around, and honestly, I don't know how they stayed in business as long as they did.
Number 6.
The year is 2003. I am a 15-year-old boy living in a small city. This is a place where everyone seems to know everyone. I am typically shy and often use the internet as a way to meet people. During this time, the instant messenger ICQ was still pretty popular amongst the teens in my area. I would often stay up late adding new people and chatting them up. I would do this by searching by city and adding people I knew from school. This is how I met her. Her name was Sarah. We began chatting innocently enough, the normal "hey, what's up" sort of deal. Now, Sarah was a self-described 17-year-old girl, short, brown hair and nerdy. We hit it off pretty fast. We had so much in common and I found it easy to open up to her. Although I thought it was strange that I'd never seen her in school. I go to a Christian school, explaining why I had never seen her. We continue chatting for some time and I eventually give her my phone number. We chat regularly over the phone until eventually she asks, "Would you like to hang out sometime?" Without hesitation, we make plans for me to go over to her house and hang out and watch movies. The day finally comes for us to hang out. I make my way across town to the address she gave me. It's a small apartment building. Slightly confused on how she and the rest of her family would fit in such a small apartment, I make my way up the stairs. I knock and I am immediately greeted at the door by a woman, maybe in her late 20s or early 30s. I knew that this was Sarah, but she didn't look anything like she described. I was instantly weirded out but followed her into a small one-bedroom apartment. I stupidly asked, "So, are your parents home?" She laughed. "No, it's just me here." I am now sitting awkwardly on the couch. "Do you drink?" She's looking at me across the room. "Water?" I joke. We both share an awkward laugh as she pours me a glass of wine. I never take a sip of it. She sits
My family and I live in Arizona, and we occasionally visit our Navajo family in Albuquerque, New Mexico. We left early to get there by noon or less. It is a very long and boring trip there, but we get there before noon and we have time to mess around and talk with our extended family. And we, kids, start to play around till the evening starts to show. The house is too small for everyone to fit and sleep in. Some of the kids have to sleep in the trailer and truck camper, but two of my cousins and I had the amazing luck of sleeping in the old, slightly torn tent. We are well asleep at this point, and for some unknown reason, I wake up. Of course, I'm still tired and rubbing my eyes while yawning, meaning I wasn't well aware of my surroundings. Once I finish rubbing my eyes, I look straight at the entrance of the tent and see a figure illuminated by the back porch light standing in front of the tent. At first I was scared, but thought it was my other cousins just messing with us. As this person was still standing outside our tent looking at us, I turned to one of my older cousins who was 2 years older than me to wake him up and tell him that someone was standing outside of our tent. He tries to brush me off, but I persist and he turns to me and asks me what I wanted. I tell him to look at the entrance of the tent, and he does. I've never seen someone go from the brink of sleep to sheer panic and alertness in their eyes that fast before. He looks at me with this panicked face and tells me to be quiet. He whispers to me that it's a skinwalker and that we need to be quiet again. We lay there for the longest time, and from my memory it was at least an hour or more. We were just about to go back to sleep because it hadn't done anything. Then it started to move around the tent. Remember when I said this was an old tent? Yeah, it had some holes in it. One of the holes was the size of a quarter, and I decided to be brave. As it continues to walk around the tent a fourth time, I slowly crawl towards the hole and try to take a look. As I did this, my cousin told me to get back to the bed or it'll hurt us. Of course, as a kid, I ignored the warning. I'm at the quarter-size hole and looking out to see whatever it was. It comes around the hole, and what I saw was bone-chilling. I bolt back and hide under my sleeping bag while my cousin does the same. This thing decided to stop moving and start looking at us again. I hid under the covers and spent every ounce of energy being scared. And then I finally fell asleep. I woke up early, maybe around 5, and I decided to look around the tent to see if there was anything there. I see footprints, bare footprints that send shivers throughout my body. I saw the footprints move around the tent. This hit me hard because I was now realizing it wasn't a dream. As I further investigate the footprints, I noticed that it went off track. It went off to the rocky hills nearby where we were staying at. I followed the track to the hills, about a football field away from the house. As I continue to follow the tracks, something strange and scary happens. It goes from 2 footprints walking for a while to footprints and handprints in the dirt starting to form. I found that kinda strange because no person would do that out here. As I followed the tracks further into the hills, the hands and feet started to get smaller and smaller. It then subtly changed into coyote paw prints. That is when I stopped and turned back home, first walking fast, then onto a full-on run. When I got back, I sat down on the back porch for a while and thought about telling my family, but I didn't think that they would believe me. In the end, I didn't tell anyone, even the cousin I woke up in the middle of the night. Well, that's my story. I urge you guys to not go into the Navajo reservation to go looking for them. You will bite off more than you can chew. We, my people, take these beings very seriously and do our best to not talk about them. Even though I broke this code, I just thought to warn you guys about them. Whoever is listening are the first people to hear this story. I had a few more stories to tell, but this is by far the scariest one I had.
Hey everyone, hope you enjoyed the video. I know I have a lot to address, there's a time and place for that, and the end of a video. My name is Corey, and I've spent a lot, and I mean a lot of time camping, hiking, and hunting. I've seen all kinds of predators, and I've been in some sticky situations. Everything from a tornado heading my way to being tailed by some bears, so I don't exactly frighten easily. This past July, I was out camping near my family's farm in western Iowa, along with my girlfriend Alexa, my best friend Jason, and his new girlfriend, Samantha. Samantha actually had never been camping before, let alone more than a mile off the trail in the middle of a forest. She was understandably nervous, but we were watching out for her. We do have to watch out for prairie rattlers, poison ivy, and even mountain lions in this part of the state. We made camp in a clearing on top of a small hill with a few trees, but we were deep in the woods to be sure. We arrived to make camp, eat, drink, and went to bed by midnight. Nobody had any injury besides a few mosquito bites. Everything was going according to plan until suddenly I woke up to the sound of Samantha screaming at the top of her lungs. I just couldn't believe how loud she was screaming. It was actually insane. I woke up, I guess at the same time as Alexa grabbed my light and my Glock and ran out. I told her to stay in our tent just in case. Jason was already trying to comfort Samantha, and she was talking, almost babbling about something huge walking through camp and scratching at the tent and making a terrible sound. I told her it could have been a coyote or even a mountain lion. What little food and trash we did have was outside of the camp area, so that wasn't an issue. But I assured her that I would stay up and light the fire again. That I would take turns with Jason watching the fire because our movement and the fire should scare anything away. This seemed to comfort her, and she actually went to sleep in with Alexa. Jason and I both stayed awake, talking quietly, watching the fire and checking around camp for tracks and signs. We couldn't see anything obviously wrong or suspicious. It certainly could have been a mountain lion, and this did have me on edge with the girls there. About 30 minutes had passed and Jason walked just out of the firelight to take a leak. He was off to my left, my tent across the fire in front of me and Jason's tent behind me. There, off to my empty right, I saw something and heard a large crunch. Jason heard it also and was practically still pulling up his pants running towards the fire. "What the hell was that? That is big," he said. I know, it could be a big cat. Better get your 44 out of your bag too and get that bright tack light, I told him. He returned with those items and we waited to illuminate whichever area we heard more movement from next. Then we heard a crunch and a snap. More movement almost directly behind us. We stood up simultaneously and spun around, turning the brightest light on. For just a second, we saw what almost looked like a gorilla-sized and shaped figure disappear back into the trees. At this point, I'm trying to keep it together and Jason is just frozen. I tell him to snap out of it and that we need to get the fire to grow. Once the fire is larger, we both need to take a position, one in front and one in the back of the tent to protect the girls. We heard this awful grumbling and growling sound for the rest of the night. I have never heard anything like it. And large crunching and snapping sounds continued to emanate from the woods behind Jason's tent and really all around us. Periodically, we would see something move either to our left or right in the clearing just outside the trees. I kept the fire going. I actually had the fire pretty enormous by the end of the night. As soon as the sun started coming up, we packed up. On our way out, we saw large prints in the mud down by a small stream at the base of the hill we were camped on top of. I can't really say anything other than the fact that they basically looked like a huge man's prints. The thing we saw was definitely not a man. I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was going to hurt us. I don't know if it was Bigfoot. Frankly, I don't want to know. The way I see it, it's really not relevant because I was thinking it was a mountain lion initially. Those are also dangerous. I won't let this stop me from camping. Sometimes I guess you just hear scary things at night in the woods. Because scary things do live in the woods. I guess that's just part of the adventure. I'm a 27-year-old male, and I've lived in the same town pretty much since I could form memories. Until my 25th birthday, I had never been out of the state of Florida, or even further north than the Orlando area. For my birthday, I decided to change that and saved for months to visit some friends I have across the country. I've known them online longer than I've known any of my local friends. The first stop was to visit one of my then best friends, Alice. We don't talk much anymore due to a falling out over her drug-addicted fiancé. But at that point we talked and gamed together for hours each week. She lives in North Carolina, close to a large city but in a rural area on 10 acres of former ranch land. Her and her fiancé lived in a large trailer in the middle of the property. To the north and east were a few acres of forest, to the west was what used to be farmland, and to the south was a long driveway, some landscaping, and the street. Alright, so the plan was for us to camp out the first 3 nights I was in town, and then Alice, Danny, and Alice's friend Kate, who was down for no-string stuff while I was in town, were going to stay in a nice hotel in the city the remaining 4 I was there. Danny had prepared for my stay by digging out a massive fire pit and collecting tons of firewood. We dropped by the store and stocked up on beer, camp foods, and bug repellent, with a little side stop to a dealer friend of Kate's that hooked us up with medical-grade pot from out of state. This was a whole new experience to me, being city-born and raised with no previous camp experience, so I was really excited. Even though we were only about 500 feet from their trailer, I felt like I was in the great outdoors. The weather was great, only getting to around 70 in the day and dropping to about 60 at night. With clear skies the whole week I was there, so we didn't bother with tents and just set up with sleeping bags. We roasted bratwurst over the huge bonfire Danny built, drank till we were buzzed, passed around the pipe a bit, and blasted music well into the night while chatting and playing drinking games. When it came time to wind down, Alice and Danny set their bags up on one side of the fire while Kate came over with me. We were both too drunk, baked, and too tired to do much of anything, so we just ended up snuggling until we fell asleep. The next day, Danny and I went out into the woods to a stream that cut through their land and a few of their closest neighbors' land for an afternoon of fishing and small game hunting. We ran into one of the neighbors who was out looking for his dog. Said he hadn't seen her in a few days and was getting worried. We told him we would keep an eye out, and Danny told him not to worry, that if she was in the woods there wasn't any predators out there and he expected her to turn up soon. The neighbor continued on and we kept fishing. Around 5 or so, we turned up with a few fish and 2 rabbits. Alice and Danny got to getting them ready to eat. The rabbit was going to be stew meat, and we were just going to cook the fish right over the fire. The night went much the same as the first, drinking, music, games, and hanging out. Not too late, Alice and Danny said they were going inside for a bit, leaving Kate and I to have some privacy. Just gotta say, sex outdoors by a roaring bonfire under a bright, starry sky for someone used to the apartment life was amazing. Almost worth what happened later. A bit after we finished, Alice and Danny came back out and we all hung out a little longer before planning the next day and then calling it a night. We slept under the stars again and it was as beautiful as the first night. Kate and I slept cuddled with me as the big spoon and slept pretty well considering we were on the ground. I woke up sometime between 2 and 5 in the morning. I can't be sure as my phone had died earlier and was charging inside. I had to piss my brains out but was too tired to walk to the house, so I made my way to the big pile of wood by the fire and stepped to the other side facing the forest. I took what had to be the longest piss of my life and went to zip when I thought I saw something moving in the tree line. Something roughly human-shaped, maybe the size and form of a lanky teenager. It stopped, looked dead at me and just stared at me for what seemed to be forever, but was probably close to 5 or 10 seconds before running off into the forest. I didn't think too much of it at the time. I mean, the closest neighbor had a boy about the same height and build, and I figured maybe he was just checking to see if we were still partying to join us. thought that I may have scared him, being a 6'2", 240-pound bearded bear of a man. I shrugged it off, went back to Kate, and fell asleep. The next day, we hung out inside a bit because a neighbor was burning trash and the smell was carrying on the wind right towards us. We played Xbox in the living room most of the day, and Alice made that rabbit into a damn good stew. Around 5, we went back out and resumed the bonfire activities. The neighbor and his son came over around 7, bringing beer and a big Tupperware container of homemade jerky. We shot the shit for a while before I remembered the night before, and I apologized to the teen for scaring him off. He was very confused, so I explained myself. He told me he had been up all night playing Halo at home and never left the house. I was surprised, but Kate and Alice said I was probably imagining shit and teased me about being a city boy in the country for the first time. I swore by what I saw, but the neighbor just asked us how hard we had been partying and laughed it off. I just dropped it and went back to the previous discussion and card game we had going. Around midnight, the neighbor and his boy headed out in their truck and we decided to turn in for the night, considering the early check-in time and the long drive for the hotel the next morning. Sometime just before sunrise, I woke up with a very uncomfortable feeling. I have bipolar disorder and anxiety issues, and together they caused me some problems, one of which being really bad nightmares. I passed it off as that and shifted to get up to take a leak, but stopped cold when I felt breath on the back of my neck. I almost passed it off as Kate deciding to snuggle me from behind in my sleep, until I woke up enough to realize that she was right in front of me. She was looking right at me, scared out of her mind, crying. I started to turn my head to see who was behind me, and she repeatedly mouthed no silently. The breathing got heavier and raspier, and I felt weight shift behind me. Kate's eyes followed the movement and froze as it stopped. It felt like forever, whatever was behind me just there and us as still as death. Then Alice's phone went off. A text message. A "I'm too fucking tired" grunt came from her direction, followed by her snores. At the same time, whatever was behind me pushed off the ground hard and went into a full run to the tree line and then into the forest. Kate and I laid there until the sun came up, and she refused to speak a word until then. When she finally spoke, she said that she woke up to take a piss just before I woke, and noticed something crouched over us by its shadow. She turned over thinking it was Danny or Alice trying to get one of our lighters, and saw a sickly gray-looking figure that looked like the personification of cancer grin at her. It put its finger over its blistered lips and made a shush sound, before grabbing at its crotch and laying down behind me. Fearing for what it might do if she said anything or I turned, she kept quiet and just cried and tried to warn me. We woke up Alice and Danny, who immediately went inside, called the cops, and came out with a shotgun, a rifle, and a pistol. We sat facing the forest with guns ready until an officer came out. He took our statement, but didn't seem to believe us. Maybe the beer cans all over? I don't know. We were shaken as all hell, and not too long after he left, we got our shit and got out of there. The rest of the day was spent in the hotel, just trying to get over the incident. I put on my big boy pants and manned up. I had saved a lot for this trip, and I was going to enjoy it. I was out of that area and safe with a gun at hand. The rest of the trip was fantastic. Great food, awesome sights, and a lot of fun outside of the city. I almost forgot about the whole incident and had put it totally out of my mind until I got to the next leg of my vacation. I had just unpacked in my hotel in Utah when I got a call from Alice. The neighbors with the missing dog had found it, dead, along with several other dead dogs, cats, and rodents. During his search of the woods, he came up on a part belonging to a property that hadn't been lived on in years. In this stretch of the woods, he found a crude shack he said reminded him of a hidden moonshine still or meth lab. Inside, he found dead animals, a bunch of old Playboys, an old mildew-stained and moist-looking mattress, a ton of tiny alcohol bottles, fluid-stained women's underwear, and what looked like crack pipes. He reported it to the police immediately, and they sent out a pretty large team to look into it. They caught a man trying to flee from the scene. Apparently crazy, on drugs, or both. When they detained him, he tried to molest the officers, spit at them, yelled unintelligible nonsense, and touched himself in the back of the cop car. The guy was almost exactly what Kate had seen. Dear psychotic, methed out madman, if I ever see you again, you better hope you get me before I get you. Fucking creep. This story takes place down a road near the house I grew up in rural Canada. So my best friend and I grew up together, and we were neighbors from about 6 years old up until I was about 15. Her, my sister, and I would always go for walks down a road near our house when we were younger. She still actually lives at the same house she grew up in, but we moved a long time ago. So one day, while my sister and I were at her house, we decided to go for a walk for old time's sake. We went down the same road as we always did, and it was actually a lot of fun. We all love walking and hiking, so we really enjoyed this. It was Thanksgiving weekend, and the trees looked beautiful with all the fall colors. This particular road had a lot of hills and trees and is very scenic, especially in the fall, but is very isolated with almost no houses and close to nobody ever passing through. As we're walking along the road and we start nearing the bottom of the first huge hill, we see, in the ditch of the road, a freezer. Now, because of the isolated location, there is no guardrail, despite there being a massive gully. We're instantly intrigued when we see it and begin nervously laughing and joking that there'll be a body in there. Obviously, we weren't going to leave without looking inside. This was our road after all. We knew this area like our own home. So we all approached this small freezer and noticed that laying beside it is a black garbage bag slightly torn open. We use a stick to tear the bag and peek inside to see a dirty child's booster seat and a single child's shoe. We thought it was strange, but people often dump unwanted garbage down the gullies in the area, so we move on and proceed to open the freezer. As soon as we do, it hits us. This foul and disgusting odor. I have never smelt something so vile. We slam it shut and run away gagging. My sister throws up, and I, seeing that, almost throw up myself. At this point, we are disgusted, but we have to see what smells so bad. My friend stays back to keep a lookout while my sister and I go back to see. This time, we hold our breath and peek inside, and there we see it. A decomposing blob of flesh partially in a black garbage bag. Half of the inside of the freezer was black with flies and covered in brownish blood. We can see some ribs and what appears to be a skull. The flesh is a mix of brown, red, and grayish ooze. We slam the freezer shut, gagging again. We decide to go back to my friend's house to grab some gloves, hoodies, and bandanas to tie around our mouths and noses. We return with her car this time so we can leave quickly if need be. Now, I should mention that there's a house about 1 kilometer down the road that most people in the area suspect to be a grow-op or meth house. And we were afraid that we stumbled upon their freezer and that maybe they'd see us. Hence why we wanted a car to leave in a hurry. So when we return, we leave the car running and proceed with gloves and bandanas covering our faces. We record so we can look back at the video later without having to keep the freezer open for too long. Again, we can make out some ribs and possibly a skull and, of course, the chunk of rotting meat. I'll play one of the videos on screen right now. I'm not able to show the video with the possible ribs and blood everywhere because YouTube will punish me, but I am able to show one of the videos.
Suddenly, we hear a vehicle coming down the road and freak out. Not many vehicles drive by this isolated road, so we're instantly suspicious. We run toward our friend's car, but before we can make it, we see a van driving by slowly. As they drive by, we realize it's just a family cruising through, probably sightseeing or something. When they're out of sight, we check out the freezer several more times and finally find what appears to be a deer hoof. My sister gives up and says it's just a deer that someone put in their freezer, then either forgot about or their freezer broke. So they decided to dispose of it in the gully due to the smell and not wanting to clean it up. My friend and I aren't so sure. We're convinced someone may have killed someone. A child most likely because of the booster seat and shoe we found earlier. And maybe they threw a deer hoof in there to throw people off. I've heard of some serial killers doing this to evade suspicion, and everyone passes it off as a dead animal. Anyway, we phone the police and they tell us they'll send someone to come talk to us so that we can show them where we found it. We wait a couple hours and no one shows. We call the number the dispatcher gave us, which was a non-emergency number, and they tell us they'll send someone the next day. They probably didn't take us too seriously, and seeing as it was Thanksgiving, they probably didn't want to bother sending anyone out. We made sure to tell them that it may just be an animal. I mean, obviously we didn't want to tell them that we 100% found a dead body, but that we would like someone to confirm and to get rid of the freezer. Maybe that's the reason they didn't come. I don't know. Long story short, the police never showed up or even contacted us to ask any questions. When we returned several weeks later, the freezer was gone, as well as the booster seat and child's shoe. Everyone we told laughed it off and said it was a deer and that we were crazy. I'm not so sure. I'm still convinced, to this day, that we found a human body. I live in the only house down a country road. Everything else is pasture land and national forest for several miles. It's about 3 a.m. and my 3 large dogs go absolutely nuts barking, which sends my husband and I flying out of bed to check on our livestock, assuming that coyotes were in the yard. Before we can even get our shoes on, we hear muttering on our front porch. He grabs his rifle and whoever it is starts knocking on the door with no real urgency, but more like a casual visitor. I had my cell phone ready, already dialing the cops, and my husband slid up to the peephole. A woman that looked right around her late 20s or early 30s was standing outside, patiently waiting a few minutes and gently knocking on the door, not fidgeting or nervous and not being aggressive. My husband said, "Ma'am, the cops are on the way. If you need help, they'll be here in just a few minutes and you're welcome to sit on the swing right there and wait on them. But if there's anyone with you, we are armed in here and will not hesitate to shoot if anyone tries getting into this house." He said she kinda smiled, not creepy, but like she was glad her knocking woke someone up. She then said,
"That's okay, sir. I just wanted to let you know the thing in the woods is coming, and he'll be here soon. Good luck."
He said she turned around and walked down the driveway like she hadn't a care in the world. The cops looked all over the place and couldn't find her. It's a 10-minute drive to our driveway from the main road with no houses until you get into town, another 20 minutes away. The whole thing freaked me out for weeks. Alright, so that story was posted to Reddit, and soon after, people started coming up with theories as to what could have really been going on. One person commented saying, "Here's my theory, a Bonnie and Clyde type duo. The woman is late 20s to early 30s, which really doesn't paint a very intimidating person to show up at your front door at 3 a.m. The fact that the knocking seems so innocent is just more of a reason to open the door. You think some poor woman needs help, but her boyfriend or partner is hiding away from the people ready to bust in the house the second the door is opened. When you say the cops are on the way, they're obviously not going to stay around. So a bit annoyed, she says something snarky about a thing in the woods to try and freak you out and then goes on her way. This was a really good theory that had a lot of people convinced.
Things like this do happen more often than people think, and it is very dangerous and something you should be aware of. The original poster then went on to update the post later on with what was actually happening, saying, "Update. Tuesday, a surrounding house from nearby asked us if we had any more issues with late-night visitors. We told him we hadn't, and he said a girl matching the description we gave them when we asked if anyone knew her knocked on their door over the weekend. He said it was the same. She very calmly knocked, but this time she said she needed help. He told her he'd get the cops and an ambulance for her, and he heard a male voice say, 'No fucking cops.' The girl started asking for water or a phone or to use the bathroom. Keep in mind, this is at 1 or 2 a.m. He kept her talking, and luckily there was a cop super close on the highway this time, because they pulled up and caught them. It was one girl and 2 guys. They had a car parked down the road a little bit with another girl in the driver's seat. As it turns out, they're wanted for distributing narcotics and selling stolen goods. They were stealing people's medication and who knows what else." Here's something for you guys in the comment section to debate about. A Reddit user posted photos from their trail cam, and it has a lot of people confused as to what it is. I'll quote what they said, show the pictures, and I'll leave the rest up to you guys. "I went to bed after a day of hiking through the brush and watching wildlife. Woke up in the middle of the night to my dog growling and heard some rustling and some other noises. Just assumed it was one of the foxes that lives around here and went back to sleep. I got up in the morning to check the trail cam and I found this. The timestamps are all fucked up on that camera and I can't seem to fix it because it always changes itself, but yeah. The figures in that picture seem like teenagers or something, but judging by the height of everything around that spot, they'd only go to my hip. The nearest town is at least 45 minutes away down a few gravel roads. I have no clue what they were or why they were so tiny. Here's a picture during the daytime to help give some more idea on their size. So what do you guys think it is? Leave a comment with your thoughts in the comment section. This happened back when I was 12, so it was 1986 to 1987 time frame. It was a hot summer night in June. My sister was friends with the 2 neighbor girls and they decided to camp out on our back patio. We lived in a small community that was basically a bunch of houses on a circle. We were about 5 minutes from downtown, but it was a small southern town. So kids camping out in the backyard was common and no one thought much about it. On this night, I decided I would pitch a tent and camp beside the patio. After a few hours, probably around 1 a.m., the girls asked if they can come in the tent because they thought they saw someone watching them from the side of the house. I just figured that they were scaredy cats and told them that they could if they would be quiet and go to sleep. I didn't think they had seen anyone, and if they did, it was just some of the neighborhood boys trying to scare them. But once they got in the tent, I could tell that they were legitimately frightened, and to be honest, that frightened me a bit. I was your typical southern boy. I had been hunting and camping my whole life. I had been in multiple fights and was taking karate at the time. Could I fight toe-to-toe with a man? No, definitely not. However, I wasn't easily scared and felt I could handle myself. The girls told me that they had heard something beside the house and had seen a man that they didn't recognize crouching down looking at them from the corner of the house. I zipped the tent shut and was unnerved, but realized we were just outside of our house. My father was in the house and my neighbor's house was only about 20 yards away. As I listened to them talk about the guy, I ran my fingers up and down the inside of the tent. Still not completely convinced that they had seen anything. It was then that I got one of the largest scares of my entire life. Someone on the outside of the tent put their fingers against mine. I was immediately frightened, and then things got worse. Before I could process what had happened fully, someone started kicking my tent. The front of the tent collapsed and there was no way to unzip it and escape quickly. I told my sister and her friends to yell and to yell loud. From outside the tent, I heard a raspy voice reply calmly, "No one can help you." We didn't listen and started yelling for help. After what seemed like 30 minutes of yelling, but was probably only 30 seconds, I saw the neighbor's bedroom light come on through the tent. Then we started yelling his name and screaming for him to help. It was then that our back porch light came on and a voice said,
"You kids are disturbing the peace. Please come out."
When we came out, there was a short, chubby man smoking a cigarette leaned against our house. He had a badge on, but there was no police car. I remember seeing a small truck parked on the street between our and the neighbor's yard. About that time, my father opened the sliding glass door and we quickly went in. The guy turned and left before my father could see him. When I looked out the living room window, literally 15 seconds later, his truck was pulling off. I knew all of our local police officers, and that guy definitely wasn't one of them. Looking back, I believe that creepy, chubby bastard was just dressed like a cop. I believe he wasn't local and was just looking for kids. It was scary, but it could have been a lot worse. However, now the thing that bothers me looking back is that my tent wasn't visible from the road, and with the girls on the patio, you couldn't see them from the road, because there was a large bush and a wooden privacy fence on that side of the house. Someone had to have told them that we were out there. No one knew except her parents and my father. I decided to camp out there after my father went to bed and no one knew I was out there. Meaning someone, either intentionally or unintentionally, told some type of demented person where two 10-year-old and one 12-year-old girls were camping. I hope it was unintentionally shared, but the whole thing was planned late and he specifically knew where to go. That feeling of his fingers touching mine from outside the tent will haunt me forever. This happened 8 years ago when I was a sophomore in high school. My Urbex friends and I were on a bike ride looking for cool places to explore in a relatively dilapidated area when we discovered a really creepy cave, which we later learned was an old abandoned cement mine. We did some mild exploring that first day, but quickly realized it would require more gear to thoroughly explore, like flashlights, respirators, etc. About a week later, 5 of us came back with the proper gear and a camera to see what we could find in the mine. We discovered there was basically one main shaft that sloped downward and deeper into the earth, so we followed that main route. It was wide enough for a car to drive down and was pretty well graded, so the walking was easy. There were many rooms, old machinery, and rusting equipment off of this main shaft, but we mostly avoided it in the beginning. We were trying not to get lost or confused. Along the way, the walls were littered with the classic abandoned graffiti. X was here, swastikas, initials and dates, phallic drawings, etc. As we got deeper and deeper though, the graffiti really thinned out. At this point, the light from the entrance was long gone and we were relying solely on our flashlights. The air was so stagnant and hazy with particles that the light from our flimsy flashlights could only go about 20 feet or so before getting totally obscured by dust. Thank God for our respirators. The glow sticks we had brought to mark our way so that we wouldn't get lost were also basically useless because they would disappear in the haze only a few steps after dropping them, and we had only brought about 10 or so. At this point, we started arguing amongst ourselves.
Several of the crew was nervous about going any deeper with the air quality being so terrible and without a good way to prevent us from getting lost. We were probably a quarter-mile into the earth now. The rest of us managed to override that sentiment of fear by assuring them that the path was easy and straightforward so that we'd have to try to get lost. We were going to rely on our level-headedness, sense of direction, and flashlight battery life to get out. Despite the agreement to push on, it was becoming very creepy for everyone. We walked for a while in silence, hearing nothing but our own movements and the steady. So it was late summer and It was around 1 year ago. I was 18 and going through the usual trials and tribulations of being an adult and, unemployment, yearning for independence, and figuring out what to do with the rest of your life. I handled these by going on walks and clearing my head by following the worn-down footpaths of nearby forests and going to bars. It all starts with a visit to one of the bars around the area I live in. I would usually just have either a Fanta or a Coke and leave in about a couple of hours. So I did that, left the bar, and started to walk back to my motorcycle. I sling my leg over and I take a look around and I spot someone peeping around a corner. Unnerved, I try to avoid his gaze and just focus on getting home. I pull out of the bar parking lot. Halfway through the journey, I begin noticing a car behind me, a 2005 Vauxhall Astra following me everywhere. Once again, I felt unnerved by what seemed like a coincidence. Turn after turn, it followed flawlessly. Eventually, I got to my street, and the car turned left into one of the cul-de-sacs. I then breathed a sigh of relief, thinking it was just one of our neighbors. I pulled into the driveway and entered my house, still shivering from the thought of possibly having to face down a burglar or worse. And on top of that, my parents at that time were out of the country for their anniversary. The next morning, I awoke and did my usual routine of getting breakfast and getting ready for the day ahead. Last night's events brushed off as a misunderstood coincidence, or maybe me just being too paranoid. Later that day, around 6 at night, I went out for a walk and I decided to head out to a forest around 5 miles away. I arrived and began walking down one of the dirt trails, just enjoying the remainder of the sunlight before the sun went down. Around 500 meters up the trail, I got a feeling that I was being watched. I took a cursory look around and saw some movement in the trees. My first thought is a deer or maybe some birds. I look around a bit and see nothing, no people. It's completely silent. I press on anyway, thinking that I'm just being too paranoid. On the way back up the trail, no sooner than 5 minutes later, I hear rustling noises coming from the trees and bushes. I turn around to see someone coming out of the bushes. They were tall, dark, and wore a hoodie with the hood up which obscured everything on his face besides his eyes. They say the eyes are the window to the soul, and well, this guy just from his eyes alone looked insane. And to top it off, he laughed, and this laugh wasn't just a small chuckle. It was a fully formed Pennywise the Clown laugh. It sent shivers down my spine, which sent my brain into an unending tirade of questions. Who is this guy? What is he doing here? What is that in his hand? Looking over him, I see he has a massive hunting knife. I just turned and ran with his psychotic laughter following me down the trail, my brain thinking of more and more screwed up things this guy would do if he caught me. I went off the usual trail and into some lesser used ones. This, I would argue, was my biggest mistake. He followed me down it laughing and yelling incoherently. I looked back and didn't see him, so I hid in the bushes and stayed as still as possible. I hear footsteps and heavy breathing. He stops, looks around, and continues on. I waited until I could no longer hear him, and then I make a break for it and start running back. After I break from the bushes, I hear a yell. It's darker now and I can't see him. I keep running until I reach the place I parked my bike. Right next to it was the same car I had seen the night before. Then I heard, "There you are," yelled right behind me. I grabbed my keys, got on my bike, and sped off, going as quick as my crappy 125 would allow me to go. I arrive home and put my bike into the back garden. I then stay hidden in my house for the rest of the evening, almost unable to sleep. I woke up in the middle of the night around 1 a.m. to sirens and yelling. I take a peek out of the window and I see police and ambulances in the middle of the street. I watch as they take a man struggling against the police out and throw him into a police car. I watched a little longer and the police took him away. I went to sleep safe with the knowledge that I and my neighbors were safe. The next morning, I went to the police station and told them I was there about the incident last night. They took me to a detective's office and I told them everything that happened from the last 2 days. They told me that the guy had tried to break into my neighbor's house and he got the idea that I lived there from the fact that he also owned a motorcycle, and that my neighbor had left his in the driveway that night. Turns out the guy suffered from mental illnesses and was off his antipsychotic medication. After a bit of questioning, I left the police station, a bit shaken but relieved that the guy was off the street, hopefully getting the help that he needed. My girlfriend is 17 and she has 2 outdoor working type jobs that she loves. She works up in the hills of Western Australia where she has to drive an hour each day to get to her work. It kinda sucks as there's no mobile connection up there, so I have no idea the times that she gets home from work. She works as a high ropes course instructor at a campsite for kids and adults that come for the day. Sometimes she can work pretty late and ends up driving home when it's really dark. And let me say, she doesn't exactly have the best car. It's well known for the amount of times it breaks down by overheating, especially in the summer. Luckily, her dad taught her how to fix this, as there's no reception up there for help. The roads home are long, empty, and barren with no signs of life anywhere. As usual, every now and then my girlfriend's car decides to break down, and this time I was getting particularly nervous as it was nearing 8 p.m. and she still wasn't home. She rung me when she got to the nearest town with reception, crying and unable to speak on the phone. I desperately tried to calm her and asked her what had happened. She choked back tears and explained this story from the beginning to me. She had been driving home as usual as the sun set on the horizon, blaring out her AC/DC CDs down the long, empty straight roads home. Her car had begun jerking and she was unable to push down the accelerator without it sticking. Anyways, long story short, her car had broken down again. It was getting pretty dark, but still light enough for her to see as she was head deep under the hood of her car trying to find the problem. About half an hour passed, and at this time she was considering sleeping in her car for the night until help came around. This was until she saw the headlights of another car coming out of the tree line about 500 meters from the dense bush littered with empty camping grounds. My girlfriend's not the most confident person, but this time she really needed help, so she decided to flag down the car. She said it was a silver soccer mom car that was covered in red dirt. She assumed it to be a camper who decided to leave late and was now being waved down by some crazy teenage girl. The car pulled up slowly a short distance behind hers and a tall, lanky young man stepped out. He was wearing a soccer-themed hat and dirty clothing. This was usual for my girlfriend as she's used to seeing dirty campers every day at work, so it didn't strike her as worrying. Now, the thing that did worry her though was that the man's car had no license plate. The man grabbed her attention by shouting over what tools he'd need to grab out of his car to help her. He seemed nice enough. He brought an old bag full of car appliances in to temporarily fix the car so she could make it back home. By this time, my girlfriend was having to use the light on her phone so that they could see what they were doing. She told me he was very quiet and barely spoke a word while standing next to her. Only the crashing of tools was breaking the silence of the empty woods. Suddenly, the man looked up at her and said,
Hey, would you mind getting the duct tape out the back of my car so I can patch this pipe up real quick? Alright, so my girlfriend has a good heart and sometimes can trust people a little too much. So she did as he said and walked over to his car. He shouted back at her that the car door was stiff, so she would have to yank it open to get inside. She pulled open the door and was struck by the foul smell of body odor. The car was filthy and full of tools. She spotted the duct tape among a pile of rusty tools on the far seat and was reaching over the seat to get it when she felt someone shove her by her back legs into the car. She turned around, screaming at the man to get off of her and kicking him in the head as he tried to hold her down by her ankles on the back seats. When he leaned in close enough, she reached down and grabbed one of the tools laying on the floor and swung it at his head. He swung his head back and fell onto the road as she stumbled out the car with her phone. She didn't pause for a second and sprinted towards the tree line, only looking back to see the man on his hands and knees spitting blood onto the tarmac. She ran into the nearest set of bushes that led into the woods and didn't stop until she reached a campsite. She ran into a camp of 2 men with their kids who were eating dinner at the time. She couldn't stop crying and told the men what had happened. One of the men ran off in the direction she had came from to try and find the sick fuck who tried to abduct her. The other sat with her around the campfire, desperately trying to calm her down. It wasn't long before the other man came back, saying he had only found an empty car, which was hers, and a spurt of blood on the ground a few meters from her car. They towed her car back to the nearest town that same night and contacted the police. Nothing's come of it so far, just a few routine searches around the area for that car. But let's just say my girlfriend hasn't wanted to mention it until now. Alright, so a little background information. I worked the night shift at a local gas station when I was 19. I am a female, about 5'6", and was the only employee in the store, as usual. On Christmas Eve, I had to work the overnight from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. into Christmas Day. It was a normal night, no customers, and my cleaning was almost finished. I had just got done eating and decided to go out for a smoke when I hear someone walking towards the store in the distance. So nothing out of the ordinary until the person gets to the pumps and I can actually see them. It was a male, about 5'9" and somewhat thin. He was wearing a dark hoodie, jeans, and was carrying a gift bag. As he got closer, I noticed he was bleeding from his forehead. As he approached me, I asked if he was okay and if he needed help. And then I noticed that the bag was empty, which really should have been my first red flag. The guy looked me in the eyes, looking dead inside, and said, "You want to help? Then don't call the fucking cops." I agreed and told him that there was a first aid kit inside and that I'd be happy to help him with his wound. Crazy, I know, but I was just trying to be nice to him since he was someone who could be a threat to me. We went inside the store and I got the first aid kit. As I pulled out the stuff for him to clean himself with, he said he needed to use the restroom and once again told me not to call the cops. I told myself that if he wasn't out of the bathroom within a reasonable amount of time that I was going to call the police. He didn't come out, so I went outside and called. The dispatcher told me to stay out of the store and find somewhere safe to be until the officers arrived. I stood at the side of the store where he wouldn't be able to see me, but I could see if he came out of the bathroom. He didn't. The police arrived and asked where he was. I pointed and they went in. Just as they got to the door, he opened it and tried to lunge at one of the officers. They tackled him, threw a knife that he was holding, and promptly arrested him. As they were walking him out of the store, he told me that I was lucky that the police got there when they did, and that he would see me again soon. I was a little shaken up by that. One of the officers came in to take my statement after they took the guy away. I told the officer everything that happened, and then I asked something I really wish I didn't know the answer to. What was he doing in the bathroom? The officer told me that it was a good thing that I called them when I did, because the guy had shot up some heroin in the bathroom, then was going to come out with a knife, stab me, and run with what money was in the register. That's what the bag was for. This guy had a lot of problems and a lot of anger inside of him. The reason he was so angry was also the reason his head was bleeding. He owed his dealer money and got beat because of it. His solution to the problem was robbing the store. The officer told me if I didn't call when I did, I'd either be critically wounded or dead because he wasn't going to allow me to stand between him and that money. Hey everyone, just wanted to quickly mention some things before the video ends. So after I made my most recent video about my upload schedule, I was extremely surprised by the response I received. I've always been afraid to post a non-story related video on my channel and always afraid to ask for help in general. I just wanted to say thank you for all the supportive comments, all the likes on that video, watching this. Hey guys, so this YouTube ad boycott has put me in the fucking ground. I'm literally living off of eating soiled dirt and drinking rainwater. $1 million to my Patreon, no less, every second that my Patreon doesn't reach $1 million. Okay everyone, that was obviously just a joke. This video isn't about my Patreon, no, that would be lovely. I never ask for help from you guys and it's very difficult for me to. But I believe things have kinda reached their breaking point and I concluded it'd be a good thing for everyone if I did so. So recently, and it's no secret, I've been having trouble uploading frequently. The comments from people assuming that it's happening because I'm lazy. A little bit of context as to what made this story absolutely terrifying for me. I was 11 and at the time we lived in Florida. Life was kind of what you expect for Florida. It rained a lot and was almost tropical. I absolutely loved it there, and I loved rain as a child, not playing in it, just watching and listening to it. Whenever there was a massive thunderstorm, we would typically see a damaged fuse box or one that was absolutely burnt to a crisp, and our power would be out for long periods of time. The longest being 2 weeks. We didn't usually mind it much, the only thing that was bad was that there was no TV. It was kind of expected every time there was a thunderstorm of even moderate size that the power would go out. My dad worked the graveyard shift at the hospital, meaning usually from 9 p.m. to 7 a.m. He was usually around when the storms happened, so he would check the fuse box so that my mom wouldn't have to go into the rain. Now, onto the story. I believe it was a Tuesday, if not a Monday. It was fairly early into the night, around 8 o'clock. It was slow as Tuesdays usually are and we didn't do anything that day. We all just hung out at home and did whatever. A thunderstorm was rolling in quickly and it had hit just about 20 minutes later. Late night thunderstorms aren't something that seem to happen often, but it happened. It hung around like storms usually do. It started off as expected with lightning striking our house, or at least the fuse box, and the power went out. My dad was getting ready for work and after a couple of minutes went to check it out. What happened next is absolutely indescribable. My dad was out there longer than normal, longer than expected. Now, my dad is an enormous dude and he was then too. So seeing him come in the house frantically and scared for his life astonished me. He came in and tried to tell my mom quietly and calmly that the box had been cut. I had overheard this conversation and I didn't understand why this freaked my dad out so much. But the words kept running through my stupid little brain and then I finally caught on. My stomach almost dropped as I finally understood that one word. The box had been cut, tampered with. It wasn't even burnt this time, so we must have mistaken us being hit with lightning. Needless to say, he didn't go to work that night. He instead watched over us. Me and my little brother both slept in our parents' room that night. This is where my memory cuts off because I slept the rest of that night, but according to my parents, the story didn't stop there. Our landline rang and an unknown voice came over saying he would slit my throat and hang me off of our porch for everyone to see. My parents both say that he then let out the most terrifying, stomach-churning laugh that will scar them for life. We then called the police. I wish I could tell you why we hadn't called the police before this, but we didn't. I guess my dad thought that he could protect us just fine. The police came to our house after about 20 minutes, considering we lived in a very rural area. Not many in Florida, but they exist. The only trace the guy left behind were muddy footprints. The footprints were outside, but the oddest part about them is that they were nowhere in particular. This psychotic fuck was circling our house for no apparent reason in the rain. Usually there would be signs of break-ins or the prints would lead to a particular window, but this guy circled our house over and over. The footprints were overlapping each other like they were stacked. How he got our number, I have no idea. Now, the next part is absolutely surreal to me. The police went into the house to check the fuse box. Keep in mind our only phones at the time was a landline and my dad's damaged phone. When police entered our house, they noticed the landline had been fucking cut. I couldn't make this shit up if I wanted to. The motherfucker was in our house for God knows how long. The only comforting thing is that he couldn't have been in our house the entire night because of the footprints. While we were outside, the guy took presumably the knife he wanted to murder me with and cut the line of our landline when we were talking to the police. The police found no footprints inside the house that morning, so I honestly have no idea how this person got into our house, and I'm willing to bet that they didn't either. Despite this, the police searched our entire house that late night / early morning, and they patrolled the surrounding area for a month at least, just searching for the guy. We left Florida shortly after, so we don't know exactly how long they searched for. I would only presume it was for the month that we stayed in Florida while moving. They found absolutely no trace of the guy, but luckily he left us alone for good. I am now a 22-year-old man absolutely terrified of thunderstorms and rainstorms. The reason I tell this story is because I didn't know anything past the fuse box being cut. I didn't know that he wanted to kill me or that he was in our house to cut the landline. I didn't learn until about 2 years ago when I was 20, and it recently resurfaced in my memory. I don't think any lessons can be learned from this other than that there are some fucked up people in this world. So this happened July 14th, 2016. Me, my sister, and my brother's friend went to this abandoned house at my old neighborhood to do a photo shoot. My brother's friend is a photographer and wanted some pictures for his Instagram, so we went to the abandoned house we would always pass by while driving. There was an old mattress in the backyard, an animal skull under their front porch, dead animals all around the house, and so much more creepy shit. There was also a cornfield right next to the house, so we decided to take some pictures near there. As we were taking pictures, I look to my left and I see a man with suspenders and a hat sitting in a carriage with no top on it. I can't explain what it looked like, but I'm gonna assume it was a carriage. He's facing the other way, so his back is towards us. My sister and my brother's friend just brush it off and take some pictures of the cornfield. I was very curious to see who this was, so I walk a little closer to the man. And he just slowly turns his head and stares at me with a blank face for the longest time. I start to get a little freaked out by the fact that he's just sitting there staring at us, not even moving at all. We all get a little freaked out and start to walk back towards the way we came from. As we're walking back, we hear the loudest gunshot I have ever heard in my entire life. We all ran for our lives, so fast that I could have tripped at any moment. 30 seconds pass of us running and we finally stop and take a minute to process what the fuck just happened. The gunshot was so loud and clear, it sounded like it was inches away from us. We take a second to breathe because all of us were out of breath. As I'm processing what just happened, I turn around and see the man bolting towards us. My heart drops and we instantly run faster than we've ever ran. I was so out of breath I felt like I was going to pass out at any minute. I wanted to stop to take a second to breathe, but we couldn't. The man was still sprinting towards us. After what felt like an hour of running, we finally stopped. The man was nowhere to be seen. We felt so relieved and sat down. Then we realized we didn't even recognize where we were.
We were lost. We had run so far that we didn't even know where we were. As we were walking down the road, we found a gas station and decided to stop there to get something to eat. We walked in and we all went different ways in the store and grabbed what we wanted. We were still sweating and breathing super heavily, so the girl at the cash register asked us what was wrong. We told her the whole story, bought our stuff, and went outside to the back of the store. We then sat down to eat our stuff. The lady came outside with a cigarette and told us that the man's wife had died of a heart attack a few years ago, and that he's extremely depressed and has some mental issues. She said that he tries to kill anyone who steps foot on his property. She then said that he comes into her store to buy cigarettes and gives her nasty looks every time. We all looked at each other, shocked at the fact that if we hadn't ran fast enough, we could have been killed. We were eventually able to call someone to pick us up, said bye to the lady, and got home safely. I live in a more rural area in New Jersey, surrounded by farms. At the time, I was a 15-year-old girl in her second year of high school. There, I was a member of our school's debate team. Once a year, we would have themed debate events where other schools come to our school during the weekend. Well, I was chosen to wear a costume, which was a medieval dress. My dad was going to bring me to school, but we stopped at a gas station for something to eat for breakfast. While we were waiting in line, I saw a man getting out of an old green pickup truck and come inside. He had a long, straggly white beard and wore a trucker hat that said Hoyt. He grabbed a snack and stood behind us in line. I didn't think anything of it until I heard him whisper close to my ear, "I like your hair. It smells pretty." My dad didn't hear him, but just turned around, giving a simple nod to him while I stared forward, extremely creeped out by what I just heard. It was then that I told my dad what I heard. He didn't think anything of it until we saw the guy inside almost glaring straight at us in the car. We left and I kinda just pushed the whole thing to the back of my mind. This was until a few weeks later. I was waiting for the bus to school, not even thinking about the event that happened before. Suddenly, slowly driving by the house was a rusted green pickup truck. And before it sped away, the window rolled down a bit and I spotted the word Hoyt on the man's hat. How the man found out where we lived, I have absolutely no idea. I was about to run inside, but the bus came a few moments after. So I went to school, almost in tears. The rest of the school year passed without another sighting of him, and I was happy for summer vacation to begin. The last day of school, I had the choice of going out or staying home to watch the dogs. Wanting to relax, I stayed home with the 3 dogs. They were running outside while I was playing my Xbox 360. I really didn't want to deal with them inside since they were always so energetic. It was about 9 p.m. when my dog, Rocky, began barking aggressively, followed by the other 2 dogs. I was about to step out, but I stopped myself and looked out the door. Doing that was probably the smartest thing I ever did because at the gate was the all-too-familiar white beard and the hat with Hoyt clearly printed on it. The dogs were jumping at the fence and snapping at the man, stopping him from opening the gate. I locked the door, beginning to cry. I was afraid of what the guy could do to our dogs, but I knew I had to call the cops first. It took them about 5 minutes to get to the house, but by the time they were there, the man was gone. I gave my report as they contacted my parents and searched the yard. I became sick to my stomach when they reported to me and my parents that they found a roll of duct tape and a pocket knife at the back gate. I still think about what could have happened if the dogs weren't outside to warn me about the man. The man never returned and was never caught. After that incident, I'm now a college student in Florida in my junior year. Our school security always drives around the apartment, keeping an eye out for anything suspicious. However, even after about half a decade and 1,000 miles distance, I still get nervous whenever I'm here alone, thinking that once again I'll see the white beard and that all too familiar Hoyt hat.
So, something very strange has been happening. Let me explain. My girlfriend died on the 7th of August, 2012. She was involved in a 3-car collision driving home from work. I used to work as a third-party contractor in the convention area of the Swan and Dolphin Resort/Hotel. Sometimes we would have to be there at really odd hours for convention setup/teardown. One morning, I was there about 30 minutes before the union laborers, probably around 3:30 a.m.-ish. I also would like to point out that I used a couple of dating apps at the time, Grindr, Scruff, and Growler. The apps I use also have that location indicator that tells you how far away they were. All of a sudden, some guy whose profile was blank except for a blurry close-up of his shirt, collar, and neck started blowing up my phone on 2 different apps at the same time. I basically replied that I was at work and busy and may be available to possibly chat later. He started sending really creepy messages like, "Oh, I see you working," and other semi-stalkerish messages. I shut down the apps. I have a small office located across from one of the convention halls. I holed up in my office and told the union guys to check in with me there when they arrived. Once they got there, I felt more safe, so I set up my desk out on the convention hall's floor and just continued with my work. Around noon, I launched up the apps again to pass time during my lunch break. As if he had been waiting for this moment, he started chatting me up again from locations like 200 feet away. I told him he seemed a bit creepy and that I wasn't interested. He stopped, or so I thought. A few weeks later, I had a late night teardown around 10 p.m.-ish. As soon as I got to my office, he appeared again and started messaging me. His messages didn't seem creepy at first. Just simple things like, "Hey, how are you? You busy?" I got really creeped out and blocked him. He would then just create new profiles and continue to message me for months. The messages quickly transitioned after the first time I blocked him. He switched to saying things like, "You can't block me every time. I know where you work so I can find you again. Why won't you answer me? I deserve an answer." Later, he would just send creepy messages like, "I found you again. It looks like you're working hard. Are you alone right now?" I always believed in the "don't feed the trolls" adage and refused to engage with him, blocking him every time. He would generally only message me when I was working very early or very late, with occasional day messages while I was working the convention center floor. Convention centers are giant, wide open spaces when no events are going on, which can really add to the creepiness. But what's worse is when there were events happening. I mean, the floor is crowded with people. Hundreds, if not thousands of people, all of which could be this odd mystery man. I never really felt safe, but I can't describe the heart-sinking feeling I had when, in late July, he sent me the final messages that sent me to report him to hotel security and my own company seeking help. Here's where the unexplained part comes in for me. After putting up with this for a long time, he ended it abruptly by sending me photos of me at my desk in my office from the first day he messaged me. Let me describe my office a bit for you. My office is tiny, maybe 30 to 35 square feet. We have 2 desks set up on one side with computers and an empty table in the corner opposite my desk. The rest of the office is filing cabinets and a printer opposite the empty table. The photos seem to be coming from a part of the office where we have the extra table. It's generally an empty table without any electronics on it that we use for anyone visiting the office or to lay out floor plans. I was absolutely freaked out to say the least, but I can't imagine how he had gotten the photos. After turning over the photos, all of the messaging abruptly stopped just as suddenly as it had started. I was a 28-year-old Army veteran, and I can honestly say that I wasn't nearly as brave as I thought I would be in a situation like that. In that moment, I turned into a child afraid of letting my feet hang out of the covers for fear that a monster would grab whatever exposed portion he could get a hold of. The thought that a stranger was stalking me from an app is terrifying. But what scares me even more is the possibility that it could have been somebody who I regularly pass by at work. Someone who makes small talk with me and says hi in passing, who then the next minute is sending me anonymous creepy messages.
After all, I never did find out who it was, and I guess I'll never know. This happened in June of 2016. I have celiac disease, a disease where gluten is detected as an allergy and your body attacks itself trying to kill the gluten. Thus, my intestines are extremely damaged and sometimes bloody or infected. The reason I was in the hospital was because of me being a dumbass and eating a bunch of bread, so my intestines got really messed up. Basically, I had to go to the hospital to get some pictures taken of my intestines. This story takes place when they were extremely damaged and bloody. I was spending the night at the hospital with an IV filled with medicine to help me get better quicker or something like that. I don't really remember. The IV was attached to my stomach. I was half asleep. Before the video begins, I'd like to state a few things. This video contains some very disturbing and violent stories coming from emergency workers such as EMTs, paramedics, firefighters, 911 operators, etc. I ask that you please respect them in the comments as these were very traumatic experiences for them. I hope that this video spreads awareness on how hard their jobs are and has some lessons for you to take with you. If you can't handle extremely gruesome stories, this may not be the video for you. That being said, let's begin. Number 1. Law enforcement / EMT here. There was a family of 4 in the car. Mom driving, teenage daughter in the front seat, grandma and 5-year-old son in the back. The mom was texting and driving and didn't notice a huge sweeping curve in the road. Went head on, driver to driver with a gravel hauler 18-wheeler without either of them having time to touch the brakes. My partner arrived a minute before me, and the first thing I saw upon arrival was him crying, carrying the lifeless 5-year-old boy away from the car covered in all kinds of fluids. I approached what remained of the vehicle's passenger side, and there was blood and brain matter all over. The mom, who was the driver, was just pieces. Completely severed arms still trapped between the steering wheel and dash/hood and engine. The grandmother was pinned behind her, broken back and neck, internally decapitated. Only the teenage daughter in the front seat survived, which is how we determined the mom was texting and driving. I've responded to a lot of gross and gruesome things, but this was easily the most disturbing. My daughter was the same age as the little boy, and I will never shake the image of his sad, lifeless body and my partner crying while carrying him away. Like other emergency workers say, generally things involving kids are harder to deal with. For fuck's sake, don't text and drive. Number 2. I was a dispatcher for 10 years. When I think of one of my more disturbing calls, a couple comes to mind. There was an elderly man who called and said, "I've killed my wife. I'll be in the backyard when you get here." And then he hung up. Turns out, his wife was terminally ill and she wanted to die, so he shot her. Then he walked into the yard to shoot himself because he couldn't live without her. This was both the most romantic and tragic thing I've ever heard. Number 3. Paramedic here. It's like 11:30 at night and we get a call for a pregnant lady experiencing cramps and vaginal bleeding. Great. We get on scene and we find this lady standing in her driveway, shaking, pale, and altered. She wouldn't answer any of my questions and no one else was around. I figured she lost a lot of blood, and once we got her in the ambulance, I used a Doppler to listen for fetal heart tones. Nothing. I told my partner that I was going to check inside to see if anybody else was in there, so I grabbed a flashlight and headed towards the open garage. I noticed a lot of blood trailing inside, so I followed it, turning on house lights as I go. It led me through the garage, the kitchen, the living room, and into the bathroom where the only light in the house was already on. I called out, "Paramedics, anyone here?" No answer. I open the bathroom door and I see the blood trailing towards the toilet. Right next to the toilet was a miscarried 28 to 32 week fetus.
It smelled horrible, and I suddenly felt really freaked out. I remembered that mothers tend to still require bonding time with their kid after a miscarriage, so I picked the kid up and put the body in the bag. Then I returned to the ambulance. Once inside, my partner had started fluids on the patient, and I told him what I had found. We decided to just hit the road and get her to the hospital and en route. She didn't say anything for a while. Finally, the mom looked at me and simply and quietly asked if she could have her baby. I said of course and handed her the dead fetus still in the bag. She teared up and held it tight for the rest of the trip. I just sat there, quietly observing her vitals and holding her hand. Number 4. Passengers, keep your seatbelts on and your feet on the floor. Seriously, this is the only call I've ever projectile vomited on. There was a husband driving, and his wife was in the passenger, and her feet were in a squatting position on the dash when they were rear-ended and shoved into a boat trailer. Her left femur turned to powder when it made contact with her left shoulder, shattered both her tib and fib. Also, her scapula and her leg actually ended up looping over her shoulder, and her foot and ankle was resting between her back and the seat rest. At first, I thought it was a scarf. I was wrong. Her right knee managed to get shoved back directly into her jaw and knocked out all of her teeth, shattering her jaw and splitting it in 2 directions. Her tongue and major mouth and neck muscles